beginning the webinar so that I can spend some time having Commissioner Jacobson switch over. Okay, is everyone ready? We have a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up if you're ready. Okay, here we go. Okay, good afternoon. I am looking through our attendees list, looking for our Commissioner Jacobson. So if you would give me one moment, please. Okay, great. The time is 1 o'clock, and good afternoon, commissioners and members of the public. My name is Esther Johnson, and I am the Commission Assistant. Welcome to the October 22nd LCDC special meeting. This meeting is being recorded and is available for live streaming through Granicus. The link is available on our meetings page. And if you see the PowerPoint, let me advance that to this is our meetings page where you can find meeting materials, the agenda, and the link for public comment sign up. If you intend to provide public comment or testimony, please make sure to rename yourself with some sort of identifying title related to your organization. If you intend to testify, please sign up using the public sign up form on our meeting materials website so that we have your name in the queue. Participants will be in listen-only mode until they are called on to testify. There will be a brief pause when I switch you over from the attendee role to the panelist mode. Just a note, if you are on your phone and would like to testify and did not sign up in advance, you can press *9 and that will notify me and add you to the queue. I would like to introduce Vice Chair Katie Permine, who will be providing remarks after the roll call. Okay, and the roll call, Commissioner Halova.
I'm here.
Commissioner Sandoval.
Present.
Commissioner Warren.
Here.
Commissioner Lilac.
Here.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Here.
Vice Chair Permine.
Here.
And Chair MacArthur. Chair MacArthur has an excused absence.
Great. Thank you, Esther. Are you ready for me to take it from here?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for opening, doing the roll call, welcoming us, and welcome everyone to this meeting today. Before we get started, we have a practice now of doing a land acknowledgement before we get started. And I want to offer an opening to other commissioners. If there's another commissioner who would be interested in reading the land acknowledgement today, you raise your hand, either your real hand or the participant hand. All right, Commissioner Lilac.
Or Commissioner Jacobson, if you'd rather.
Oh,
I'm happy to defer.
Go ahead. I'll do it next time.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together.
Thank you, Commissioner Lilac. And just kind of creating a moment of space for that truth. All right, so thanks for taking time to do this very important meeting, and just to open it up by saying so much gratitude to communities, to staff, for being extremely responsive during this really difficult time in our state. Multi-layered difficulties of pandemic, wildfires, cultural difficulties. And so we're all feeling the immensity. And I just think watching and being a part of this organization makes me so proud of our community and our work. And I know many people, both on the call and commissioners, have been extremely impacted. And we have been holding you all in our hearts and just so grateful for you. So as far as housekeeping goes, we'll do just a reminder that we have a scorecard. If commissioners could make sure to fill out the scorecard today or later this week, that would be great. And then we'll need to approve the agenda before we get going. So we'll need a motion to approve the agenda in a second there.
And this is Esther. I did not send the commissioner scorecard, and so I will send that electronically shortly.
Thanks, Esther. I'm open to a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Great, thank you. So Esther, do you want to do our roll call?
Yes. Okay. Commissioner Jacobson.
Aye.
Commissioner Halova.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandoval.
Aye.
Commissioner Warren.
Aye.
Commissioner Lilac.
Aye.
Vice Chair Pearmine.
Aye.
And Chair MacArthur with an excused absence.
Great, thanks everyone. So we can move into our agenda item, and then we'll have, after we discuss our agenda item, we'll have public comment. And I think we have at least one member of the public who would like to have comments. But we hold ourselves together today thanks to the great work of John Jennings, many people in community and team to work on temporary rules for sheltering and interim housing on lands outside of UGB. So we'll be considering the adoption of these temporary rules. And the plan is to have a presentation, and then we'll have some open public comment based on the presentation. And then we have some time together just to discuss the rules and make a decision. So just again, welcoming and showing gratitude to John Jennings, and have you take it from here, John. I know you have.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Pearmine and members of the commission. This is John Jennings. I'm the Department of Community Services Specialist. I'm based in Bend. I think I would like to propose is instant with what the Vice Chair laid out. I'll go through the staff report, cover some rule language, and also maybe touch on some of the comments that we had received in writing. I didn't get a chance to thoroughly go over all of them, but we did some of them, and then of course we welcome public comment testimony after that. Does that sound okay? And I would urge any commission member to signal if I'm going over my welcome. To begin with, I think I can share my screen. I am going to maybe just start. Put up this is a map. Obviously, it's a map of most of the wildfires that have really damaged significant portions of Oregon's built environment this year. I struggled to find the right map. Some of them showed bigger areas, but not all the fires, and vice versa. But this little map from the Oregon Department of Forestry, I think, does a decent job. I don't know if it goes far enough south to really capture the Alameda fire, but most stuff is on there. So I'll just put that up as I go through the staff report. Clearly, this agenda item is for the commission to consider these administrative rule revisions, temporary rules. There's a catalog of them. The original staff report dated October 15th identifies 6 divisions. That's been now expanded to 7. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but hopefully you saw the supplemental staff report and the language there. And again, really, it's about rounding out the universe of options for taking care of folks that have been displaced by these wildfires. There's been a whole lot of that. It's been unlike anything I believe we've ever experienced in this state. To that point, we believe this is a beginning and not the end. We don't believe this is a temporary issue. It's just that this was the quickest way we could get something on the books and available for local partners to use. So we would like to see the commission adopt rules today, these temporary rules today, but then follow that up with a more permanent rulemaking approach, probably starting sometime late next spring or early summer, and having feedback from conversations with county planners. It was felt that not leaving a gap between when these rules will expire, temporary rules will expire, made sense to them. And so with that, we're offering a 3-phase approach. One is today, then follow up here shortly within the 6-month period to have something in place and intact so that when these rules do expire, there's something set to replace them. But also then the third and probably the most important and biggest lift would be to really get into the customary rulemaking process and have a detailed and thorough conversation about what it means to deal with the aftermath of these situations. So that's, I think, kind of summarizes some things. Just for the record, temporary rules are available. It's an available tool for the commission. You can do it with an abbreviated time frame of notice and hearing. They're in effect for 180 days upon filing, which we believe will probably happen the first week in November, and that gets us out to basically May of next year. And we, again, I don't think I can restate enough that this is the beginning, and we want to continue to progress towards really understanding the best way to consider these situations. I think we're familiar with the background. We've heard a lot. Some of us, but that's not quite right. Some of you have lived this and been directly involved. So I'm not going to spend too much time there. We do know that an awful lot of people are out of places to live. I heard just recently, for example, anecdotally, that in the San Diego Canyon alone, there's over 90 people living in their cars. There's much more people. Many more individuals are living in damaged homes because that's what they've got, and winter's coming, right? And so I'm sure that situation is being carried out in Southern Oregon and Clackamas County and on the coast and everywhere else. So it's a tough situation. So again, to emphasize, these rules speak to sheltering and interim housing. Frankly, sheltering probably has already happened to the extent that it's going to. So it really means interim housing opportunities are not permanent. So that's something I think we just want to continue to recognize. We're not talking about creating permanent housing opportunities on the landscape. The staff report goes through our response to the statutory tests for whether temporary rulemaking is warranted. Again, I'm not going to read that to you, but we believe strongly that it is in this case, that it's warranted, and swift measures are necessary and appropriate. And as you see, we've relied a lot, and the rules reflect this as well on the numerous executive orders that Governor Brown has issued with regards to the declaration of an emergency statewide, as well as the acts for the individual fires themselves. The rules themselves, a summary of the proposed revisions. We start with Division 4, go into Division 6. Division 11 now, which was in your supplemental staff report, Division 12, Division 14, 22, and 33. And the emphasis there in most places is with honing the existing language or existing opportunities, what we believe would be appropriate to reconcile what's better and more purposeful for emergency situations. So temporary residences and campground opportunities are pretty prevalent throughout the different land categories. So we tried to do a better job of aligning what existing policy has set forth with what really could be used in valuable for emergency circumstances. Our language with regards to the Goal 14 exception, that's in Division 14. It would be a new section 0050. Carves out a brand new opportunity to offer or authorize urban development on rural lands with full services. That's something we've never done before. Frankly, it feels a little spooky to us, a little bit scary, but we think it's the right thing to do. So if it's okay, I'm going to stop this sharing. I'm going to pause for a second to see if there's any questions, and then I'll try to walk through quickly but thoroughly. Right? I know time is important, and we've got a lot of good people that are observing, and I hope will weigh in here. So let's go up here, see if I got the right thing. So let's see. You guys probably can't see that. Okay, so I'm gonna start there. I was torn between, do I use the PowerPoint, do I not? And so I kind of split the difference and didn't want to torture everyone with 63 pages of text, most of which isn't proposed for revision. So I've tried to, maybe miss the mark, but I've tried to identify it a little more succinctly. So again, I guess I said I was going to pause, see if there are any questions, and I never really did. So I guess I'll try to do that more genuinely now. So are there any questions before I move forward? Okay, I can't see everybody, but I'm seeing some head shake. So there's a lot of stuff that you guys have seen and will see, and so we're trying to consolidate it as best we can. This has been fast and furious all the way along. We didn't have the chance to do the thorough kind of outreach that we normally like to do, but we did the best we could, and we had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and both local governments and state agencies and non-governmental organizations, and I hope they recognize that their input's reflected in these drafts. We're intending, we'll talk about this more, we're intending that the opportunities furnished here could be applied directly without the need for local program amendments. Again, the biggest change, kind of the centerpiece, is the Goal 14 exceptional language. We've worked hard to try to respond. We heard over and over again, we really want people to be able to stay in our community. We don't want them to leave and risk them not coming back. And we really need to make sure that they have a long enough time for actual recovery to occur. And we don't really know what that is, right? We never experienced this. Temporary residences, I mentioned before, are deliberately written so that they could apply anywhere in the state. So someone who's displaced from Marion County could stay on a property of a friend or relative in Mount Hood County. We've tightened things up a little bit more as it gets to be more intensive, campgrounds and transitional housing accommodations, things of that nature. And again, just to say again, the opportunities are regressive, which I mean, maybe I used it the wrong way. What I mean is that the most thorough, robust opportunities are in the built environments, unincorporated communities, Goal 14 exception areas. Going down a little bit to rural residential areas. Obviously, they still need to be rural. They still need to be compliant with Goal 14, and then lowest, which is the least amount of opportunity, would be with the resource lands, farmers forest lands. So let's see if I can scroll through here, which is not wanting to let me do. I'll try this. Okay, so some of you guys seen this. I'm going to try to be quick. I've already taken more time than I thought I would. A ton of introductions. I apologize for that. But I want to kind of set the stage a little bit about the categories of rural land we're talking about. You know, this is a rural residential example. It's a rural neighborhood, right? You can see the homes kind of dispersed across the little area. It was actually platted in 1971, so it's been there a long time. These are about 2.5 acre lots. They could be larger than that. But you know, really, it's an area characterized by an existing and pre-existing settlement pattern. So it's got some streets, it's got mail service, it's got school bus service, it's got many of the tenants of a neighborhood. The rules that would apply to this kind of an area are in our Division 4, in your Division 4, and more specifically in OAR 660-004-0040, which we affectionately call application of Goal 14 to rural residential areas. So I've tried to line this stuff up and offer some comments on the right-hand side and where this language is at in the long draft. If you care to look at it and specifically go line by line, we've added some definitions, and again, you'll see these frequently. We borrowed these from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as well as statute, with regards to how statute defines transitional housing opportunities. We thought we could set the stage as we're talking about these items, and then we go on to indicate that there are certain things that a county may authorize in a rural residential exception area. It's probably an RR5 zone or R2 zone or R10 zone, without having to amend their local program. They can apply this directly. And you'll see I've gone back and forth a little bit. I tried to figure out the best font that would be most readable. So there'll be some differences as we go through these categories. We'll also try to catch a couple typos here and there. As hard as you try to get it right, you always end up with some typos. But again, the emphasis is that a county may approve these uses when there's been a natural hazard event causing a need for sheltering, entering housing, and that is kind of quantified by this executive order language. We may want to reconsider that as we go into permanent rules, but that felt tangible, something you could hold in your hand and say, "This is it. This is the document." So that made sense to us. These uses, which I'll go on to describe, are allowed for 30 months in 2.5 years, with the opportunity for additional 12-month extensions. So as written, that doesn't limit the number of extensions. It could go on infinitely, so long as the applicant's able to demonstrate that it makes sense. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. But again, the focus is, whoops, I've gone. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a bad feeling that that's going to happen a bunch of times today. So the emphasis temporary residential uses, and we've written that to be in conjunction with the dwelling that existed. I assume you didn't write that better, on July 5th. And what we're trying to do is get a date that was early enough to make sure we weren't missing any fire, any homes that may have been destroyed by fire. We picked the July 5th date. That's the date that the Department of Forestry declared that fire season was in full effect in the state. And these temporary residential uses could be a manufactured home. It could be a outbuilding, and we really built this off of existing statutory provisions for farmland, but we've expanded it a little bit. You can do more in rural residential areas than you can do in a farm zone. And we've also built in. I want to thank the DLCD hazards team for offering, I think, pretty good language. We want to try to get these folks to avoid resiting in hazard areas. So that's again a component you'll see down through the list of these rules. So we have the temporary residences, we have campgrounds, and again tied to the executive order. They're limited to a tent, travel trailer, yurt, recreational vehicle, so on and so forth. They're not limited in the way you'll see that resource campgrounds are with regards to what you can have at each site. You'll see language in a little bit that says, you can only have, you can't have sewer, but you can't have water and power, which is actually an expansion of what we ordinarily allow. But that's one way, I guess, I would highlight that, there's a little more potential in rural residential lands than there would be for agricultural and forest lands, and a little less than would be in unincorporated communities or local forest and exception areas. So moving down, this is a neat picture. It's a part of forestry picture. Obviously, it's forest land. I didn't think anybody really needed to get a sense of what forest land looked like, but I liked it, and so I thought I'd throw that in there. We'll see a couple things here, and I realized I neglected to mention something, but I can get back to it. And on forest lands, it was felt we've heard a lot about. Want to make sure how their houses burn down and those fires can replace them. That seems entirely sensical. So we wanted to make sure that counties had a firm leg to stand on when they were saying, yeah, okay, we can do this and do this with the minimum of process, and the folks can stay out there on their property if it makes sense while that happens. So we wrote the sub P language, and we did limit it to be, it's not indefinite, so we thought 60 months seems like a fair amount of time. And so we used that. And we also offered, written in a opportunity for a staging site, a temporary site for non-hazardous debris removal. And we've also, I didn't mention that above, but we also offered that in rural residential areas. And what we've heard is that, hearing more and more about debris removal being at the top of the list of things that need to happen. And then, digging down a little further, we heard from some of our local partners, particularly folks in Lincoln County, that it was important. They had heard from the contractors to do this work. We need to make sure we've got a place to put some of these things. That's, the wood, concrete, iron, metal, those sort of non-hazardous stuff. But we may not be able to have an immediate straight pathway right to its final home. So we need to be able to put it somewhere that we can, stage it as it goes on its way. And so we want to make sure that was built in here. I'll also point out that this provision of the forest rule, the subsection 3, we've called that up here. This particular area of the rule, it specifies uses that can be allowed, but this particular category, uses that may be allowed outright on forest land. So this is, all kinds of fairly de minimis activities, temporary forest labor camps, and fish hatcheries and things like that. So it should be a minimum of process, a minimum of review. They may still be land use decisions, but they're probably a little lower categories in terms of the degree of process and administration. Turning to the other portion of our forest revisions, this looks like a lot. It's almost overwhelming. It kind of makes me a little dizzy when I look at it. But if you bear with me, it really does. It's really fairly simple once you boil it all down. And again, these are in subsection 4 of the same area of the rule, and these are subject to review standards. So this would be probably a conditional use, and the sub 5 criteria really is built off of the ORS 215-296 criteria. It's a compatibility. It's the compatibility with adjacent farm and forest uses test. So parsing campgrounds, again, this looks like a lot. Let's try to do something here. Maybe I can't. But what it really boils down to is a couple things. we've taken this existing language and we've created two different categories, and then relieved the emergency category from stuff that otherwise apply. So we've had this for a long time, and this language, I'm trying to highlight it. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. Is retained, and so it's always spoken to recreation or emergency purpose campgrounds, but then it never really was built to consider what it would really take for an emergency campground. So that's what we've done. We split those two out. So now you see we've got the recreation purpose. This is basically the same language. This is basically what we always had. But we've also put a category of emergency purpose campgrounds. And the biggest difference here is really that in an emergency purpose campground, you don't have to have the same sort of outdoor amenities or recreation amenities or be 3 miles from urban growth boundary or buffering between campsites. That seems perfectly reasonable in a recreational setting. Emergency purposes, not quite so much. They're not limited in the same way in terms of duration of stay in an emergency purpose campground. In a vacation campground, you're supposed to be 30 days in a 6-month period. Again, that's probably not going to work very well for emergency purposes. And then also, we've expanded the ability to have, maybe we wrote this the wrong way, but customarily, you're not supposed to have, as a peer, sewer, water, electric service hookup. And so we've just said you can't have sewer hookup. But would allow for water and power to individual sites. The further sort of tests or provisions would be, again, the wild or hazard stuff. But also, I'm going to bounce back up here, I'm afraid. Here we see the emphasis or the intention to keep these more developed facilities central to the area that was damaged, right? So we put in this link. We started out and say, well, it's got to be in the same county, and then we heard, well, probably what if it's just cross the county line? That could make sense. So we said, yeah, that makes sense. So it could be an adjacent county, serve the same purpose. And then we added that they have to be on the same side of the mountains. So for example, like Marion County and Jefferson County are technically adjacent, but their joining line is at the top of the crest of the Cascade. So we should talk about that some more, whether that makes sense or not. We're definitely open to conversation on it. So I'm going to go down here, and another item here that I'd draw attention to is we've written in kind of this, in our terminology, we call safe harbor, so to speak. So you still have to apply the criteria, but we've set forth a pathway of how you can be guaranteed to satisfy it. It's not the only way, but basically we said is when the governor has issued an executive order, when you limit the number of campgrounds to a dozen, or if you have up to 36 campsites and the facilities are located a long ways, 660 feet in this instance, and then again you're going to be able to satisfy those tests, and that replaces what would be a much more discretionary approach, one that is more challenging to apply and to consider, and it is more vulnerable to appeals. So moving down, temporary hardship residents, again, you kind of see this cadence. Temporary hardship residents, campgrounds, they're a little bit in the different rules based on existing rule structure. And again, this looks like a mess. It just looks like a big mess. But it does a couple things. Really, what it does is it carves out an opportunity for a natural hazard event to constitute an emergency. Typically, let's see here. Typically, we're looking at a hardship being created by an illness, by someone who's sick or otherwise infirm. But we expanded that to include the hardship can be in fact a natural hazard event. And so we split those out and said, okay, so for medical hardship, which is existing and longstanding, that's all the existing language. For a natural hazard event, here's how you do it. Here's what you look at. And some critical differences is that for a natural hazard event, it can't be a manufactured home. That didn't seem in keeping with a situation that might be a couple of years, but probably not, hopefully not a decade or more. And that it didn't have to be relative in this instance. Now we're able to do that for forest land, but because we're not constrained in the same way we are for farmland. And then we've also offered kind of the same notion of a safe harbor for how to identify when those review criteria are satisfied for a temporary residence in a forest zone.
Vice Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Could you talk about that can't be manufactured home? I feel like I didn't catch what that was.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. So what we did, and this is a policy choice, so this can be changed, but we wanted to do a couple things, and in all honesty, we also wanted to be sensitive to enforcement issues that we wouldn't want to unnecessarily see counties have to go through, because these are temporary, they are supposed to go away, and so to those points, we figured that if it's a medical hardship, and existing language does say it can be a manufactured dwelling, or an RV or a existing building. Obviously, that's going to remain intact. But as we pivoted away from the medical hardship and started thinking about what would be appropriate for a natural hazard event situation, which again we're presuming will be a shorter duration of time, and also wanting to emphasize the temporary nature, we felt that it would be worth we're talking about, and in fact recommending that those temporary residences would not be a manufactured home. Instead, they'd be a recreational vehicle or a temporary use of an existing building. And like those seem more fitting for the duration that the hardship would be present. And also, I think every single county planner ever would probably say that seeing the hardship dwellings removed at the end of the duration of the hardship is tough. Enforcing the hardship provision can be challenging, and so we thought, well, not only does it seem more fitting because it's hopefully a shorter duration, but also would help insulate or inoculate county programs from having to go out there and enforce situations where people have invested in a manufactured home, which I suspect would be quite substantial, only to have it be able to be in use for 3 years and have to be removed after that point. So I don't know if that answers your question, Commissioner. Hope it does.
Yeah, I was just thinking, is there space in between the recreational vehicle and the manufactured home where one can move their manufactured home, and I don't know the answer to that. So that I understand what you're saying. That's what I'm thinking about.
May I ask a follow-up question to that? Under B, you say, may include a recreational vehicle. So it's like a single wide trailer, which is not a vehicle because you pull it. Would that fit under a recreational vehicle category in here, or would you consider that single wide a manufactured home?
So thank you, Commissioner and Vice Chair Piermont. I believe that building codes would specify that in most instances it would be a manufactured home or a mobile home, probably a mobile home, the way the statute distinguishes them. There are instances like a park model RV. Is it at least used to be below the size threshold to be considered a manufactured home, and so they are considered recreational vehicles. So it's a different. I think the size has a lot to do with it, and age also has something to do with it. So I believe and I understand that a traditional 14 by 70 foot single wide mobile home would not qualify as a recreational vehicle.
But a recreational trailer that you would typically use for camping or something that's pulled to the site, but not a vehicle because it is a trailer. How does that fit?
I believe that would absolutely fit.
Okay.
So I'm scanning the language. Frankly, I believe that's exactly what the legislature intended when they added use of an RV or recreational vehicle to the statute ORS Chapter 215. And this language isn't dependent upon 215, but it is reflective of it. We've used it to, and it's been intact for a long time. And so I do believe that the universal understanding is that travel trailers, recreation trailers would fit.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the word vehicle doesn't mess us up.
I don't think it does, but we can definitely check into that. Thank you.
Vice Chair, if I can ask one question too, John, and I think I know the answer to this, but I just think it may be important for us to have it clearly established on our record. But when it refers to a temporary residential use of an existing building, that would be required to comply with the Oregon Residential Specialty Code. Because otherwise we, as counties, we often see unpermitted conversions of all kinds of rural buildings that are then used for dwellings or short-term rentals or all kinds of things. So just to clarify that, am I correct in understanding that the temporary use of an existing building shall comply with the Oregon Building Code?
Yeah. Yeah, I apologize. I got a dog distracted me. Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner. All right, you guys are doing great. I know it's a lot. I'm going to try, but a lot of this we can almost kind of front load it because there's consistency throughout. So a lot of the discussions that we've had so far, the explanation you've endured from me, won't have to be quite as long moving forward through the rest of the drafts. So Division 11, now we didn't include this in our original suite of proposals. Upon reflection, we realized we probably should go ahead and do this, and it'll make more sense when we talk about the Goal 14 amendment. But what we want to do basically goes like this. We have lands, or will have lands, that are eligible for urban levels of development through a Goal 14 exception and full urban services. But we want to make sure that the providing jurisdiction, the city, most likely a city, that is extending sewer to such an area, is authorized to do so. So we thought we would slip in this little revision, to make sure that these lands that will be planned and zoned for urban services and urban levels of development can actually receive those services. So hopefully that makes sense, and it may come together a little bit better as we get into Division 14, which we'll do shortly. Division 12, we had heard about at least one instance in one of the Southern Oregon communities where there was a property inside an urban growth boundary. It was constrained from a transportation standpoint. I don't really know very much about it, in all honesty. but we thought, well, if we can somehow enable this type of housing opportunity and help facilitate that inside an urban growth boundary, then that's probably worth trying to do. And so it's our understanding that site may be another, I don't know if there are others, needed access from a road that would traverse rural lands, that a county could authorize that. So we did tie it to this particular executive order, which is for the Alameda fire. So we believe that this really limits the utilization of this amendment to cities of Talent and Phoenix, and we also tried to put some limitations on what would be reasonable but not excessive for that type of street or roadway system. And we would certainly want it to be designed to minimize impacts on farmland and be removed when it's no longer necessary. So I guess I would also say, just real quick, we borrowed these standards. These, if you're familiar, I'm not that familiar, but if you're familiar with the Jackson County Development Code, you probably have seen some of this language. It comes from one of their provisions for rural roadways. So here's a picture. This isn't a land category, but this is, I guess, more representative of what we would expect, a possibility to expect. This is out of North Dakota, out of one of their big floods, and obviously it's a setting where I believe it was FEMA came in and placed a bunch of trailers to accommodate a bunch of displaced people, and that's the image that we kind of have in mind, or kind of motivation behind writing this next rule, or this next proposal, which is the possible Goal 14 exception. And again, this is different. We've never done this before in this way, but we think it makes sense, and hope you will too. We've again borrowed the definitions from different sources, and we think they're probably adequate. I don't think they're perfect, but they're probably adequate for our purposes. This language here comes straight out of the statute. It's out of a statute, and we have built in. We hope it's kind of a streamlined, maybe an overstatement, but we've tried to take what is ordinarily a very discretionary process, of being the exception process, and it should be one that requires a lot of judgment. But in this instance, we wanted to encourage a scenario where it could be done more quickly, not less properly, but quickly. We've placed a big emphasis on a public agency involvement. In fact, we've written that an applicant for such an exception would need to be a public agency. That could be a county or a city or a state agency. We've chosen, so thus far we've chosen not to define that term. Our presumption would be that if the application is to assist with a city, the city itself would be the applicant. In an unincorporated area, we presume the county would be the applicant, but that doesn't have to be the case, and it doesn't have to be for public land either. It could certainly be privately held land or owned land, but the applicant is a public agency on behalf of a particular area. We tried to build in that we really want to see coordination between a city and a county on this, and I want to make sure that any application made on behalf of the city would include a resolution of support, so that there's not any misunderstanding or anybody operating at cross purposes unintentionally. We've built a kind of different threshold for different land categories. So really we would be looking at tests for loss of housing inventory. We've chosen 30% if it's inside a city's urban growth boundary. 50% if it's an unincorporated community, or 75% in a rural residential exception area. We think it probably is most fitting and most likely to be applied for loss inside an urban growth boundary. And the following language reflects that. We've said that we want to be close proximity to the community identified in the application, and a little bit. That's going to be close by, right? So if you have an urban reserve area, some cities don't, a lot of cities don't, some do. That's where it should go. And that if you don't have an urban reserve area, you're not within an incorporated city, then you have a little more distance, but we still want to be pretty close. We believe that there's a very practical and realistic limitation on services. It's not going to be feasible to run services, particularly sewer, a long way. So it's just going to necessarily require those activities, those lands that are selected to be pretty close by. So I know I'm going over this really fast, you guys. I apologize for that. I'm trying to turn the corner here a little bit. Again, same language about being. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but Commissioner Warren has his virtual hand raised.
Hi, John.
Sorry. I apologize. No, please. I couldn't see you guys, so I just was kind of going. So thank you, thank you for stopping me.
I just want to go back to that 30% loss and just make sure I'm understanding that correctly. So what you're saying is that the city has lost 30% of their housing inventory in order to apply for something like this. I'm just wondering why the number 30% was chosen, because from my understanding, Phoenix only has something around a 25% loss. So that may mean that we wouldn't qualify in order to do something like this. So that for me is a little bit of an issue. So I want to know that kind of the background and why that 30% was chosen.
So thank you, Commissioner. That's a really good question, and admittedly, there's no real science to it. We absolutely want it to be adequate for Phoenix and Talent. I understood that it was, but if there's any inkling that it's not, then we need to change it. And so we thought that 30% was quite a bit. But we don't want to overvalue it. I mean, really. I mean, the last thing we want to do, I think, Commissioner, is to come up with a rule that doesn't work for the people that need it to work for them. So if we should lower that or raise that in order to make sure that it is applicable, I would say we should definitely give that a serious consideration. So why don't we come back? Or I guess I would just ask Vice Chair and Commissioner if you had any off the top thoughts, or if we should come back to that. Should we just stick in? I mean, I want a number that we are confident is going to work for Phoenix and Talent. If that number is 20, let's use 20.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Well, go ahead, Commissioner Warren, and then Commissioner Sandoval had his hand up as well.
I'm not certain that our number is 25%. That's the number that I remember. So it could be higher than that for all I know. But I also want to think about this outside of the realm of Phoenix and Talent and future, kind of natural disasters. Because if, for example, you have one of these events happen in a larger city where, 10% of Portland, for example's housing inventory is still close to 1,000 homes or something. That's a significant loss regardless of the percentage. So I would just be a little bit weary of having that as a percent even, because it's going to affect different communities differently. So even if you had a small community, for example, where they had 5 homes burn, and that's could be 50% too. So I just want to, I think we should have some flexibility there for these communities that, it may only be 10 homes, but it may not be anywhere close to a 30% mark.
But I think, and I think that's an outstanding point. I just realized I just jumped in front of at least one other commissioner, so I'll step back and please, commissioners, go forward.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to follow up on that. I guess I'm just surprised to hear that the 30% just came out of thin air. I would think that there'd be some sort of rationale, and if there isn't a rationale, we have to come up with something that, you know, it seems like an important threshold. So yeah, I think we got to come up with some sort of rationale that, you know, it's related to some sort of, you know, indicator or metrics that we're trying to make sure, you know, that we're not excluding folks that really need it. So,
Vice Chair Fairmeier?
Yep, I saw Josh had
Thank you.
His hand up as well, but yes, Commissioner Sandoval, I appreciate that sort of assuring that we're grounding in rationale. But Josh, do you want to layer in?
Yeah, thank you. Josh LeBombard, Southern Oregon rep for the department. So the number didn't come out of thin air, but I definitely hear what Commissioner Warren is saying. We ran this by the city of Phoenix and didn't get any comments back, but we based it on the amount of homes that were lost in relation to the number of units there. To be quite honest, it's probably fairly tight. You know, what we were trying to do for this particular temporary rule was to essentially carve out Phoenix and Talent because they lost a substantial amount of their housing stock, and they both have urban reserves. So that was really the intent here. But I think that it does deserve some attention to maybe lower that threshold at this point, either using a percentage or a total amount of units to make sure that obviously that this is available for Phoenix to use as well as Talent. I think Talent will fall into this no problem. They lost, I think, close to 40%, but Phoenix is probably pretty close to that threshold. So thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Warren.
Great. Any other commissioners? Yeah, go for it, Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you. I'll just share that as John is aware, when we discussed this issue with planning directors, we talked about these numbers as well, and we talked about the importance of loss of housing inventory. I mean, it could be a couple of homes from a flood to Cascadia, and the range is really significant. And I think really coming in on a much more informed number will come during permanent rulemaking. And so I think I appreciate just coming up with the best possible number we can today, if possible, so that we can move forward, if we can do that. So if 30% is too high, then let's go too low today, whatever we need to do, just if it's 15% or 20, whatever it is, so that we are absolutely able to capture Phoenix and Talent without question, is my suggestion.
Commissioner Lilac. Commissioner Jacobson.
Yeah, just looking at the other piece of this, which is at least 50% an unincorporated community boundary, or at least 75% in a rural residential exception area. The 50% in the unincorporated community is of a similar concern to me. I think that's frankly a little high. I was trying to do the math in my head about how many homes we had burned in our county that were all in unincorporated parts and how many are still left, and trying to do the math on that. And I guess the other point I wanted to make about both the numbers is that while I understand why you would go with a housing inventory loss, it's kind of an easy thing to count. You know, you had 8 homes and 3 burned. I mean, the other thing that comes into this in terms of housing people is it's not necessarily just the number of homes, but the number of people those homes were serving. And in the area where we had fire, there was several homes and RV parks and that kind of stuff that were fairly dense and housed a lot of people. And so, when we come to trying to help those people, it's not just always as simple as the number of homes burned. It's about how dense people were in that neighborhood. Are these single families, or these large extended families staying in those areas or not? And so while I get that's maybe beyond what we're trying to do here, that's kind of the way I think about it. in context is if you have, larger homes that only have, 2 people staying in them, it creates a lot different crisis for you than if you have homes that have a greater number of people in them.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobson. Thank you for flagging these important considerations. Any other commissioners have layers to add? All right, so John, do you want to carry on? And then it sounds like there are a few different areas through the report that we have wanted to go back to, including the emergency purpose campgrounds. And this obviously, as far as just points of discussion, but want to make sure that we're mindful of the time. I think we had planned a break for 15 minutes at 2:30. And then obviously we'll need public comment too. So just kind of wanting to make sure you're getting what you need with OSID discussion.
So thank you, Vice Chair. Of course, I'm happy to, and I'll do my best to deliver us on time at 2:30. And I before we move off this point, one of our objectives, again, a primary objective, was to establish clear and objective measures. So you meet it or you don't meet it, right? So if we were to say significant loss of housing inventory, well, that's something that's the kind of things that lawyers seize on to challenge local decisions, which is fine. That's right, it's fine. But we really wanted to have a process that was as tight as we could get it, while continuing to respect the exception process. So anyway, again, I totally agree. That's an area that is fully deserving of additional conversation as we move into permanent rulemaking. So I am going to try to hustle down through some of the rest of this stuff. Again, so again, the takeaway, you guys, is what I would say is this is a new opportunity. It's significant in that we really have tried to provide the potential to cite meaningful assistance outside of urban growth boundaries with full services, and do so in a way that is it is going to take 6 months to prepare an application, another 6 months to review, and then possibly struggle through another year of appeal. All those are fine. All those are well and fine, but this is a different thing altogether. So just sort of some companion language here, needs to be removed. Can't be the basis for a future exception. And I'm just going to move down into unincorporated communities. Again, these are areas. This is Odell out in the Hood River Valley. They look like towns. Usually, they function like communities. They don't have any municipal government, but a lot of times they do have services like sewer and water, and so they're not quite, they're not quite urban growth boundaries, but they're certainly, several notches above a rural residential neighborhood or resource land. And so what we've offered here, you'll see, as you've seen before, we have proposed a couple of definitions that are consistent with other ones. Now we did add a little bit of language here, to the interim housing that's not present in the rural residential exception area, because we thought that these were better places to encourage manufactured housing or other things like that. I think tiny houses would fit into this. We've had comments on that. We didn't call them out specifically because I couldn't get my head around what, from a legal standpoint, what they were. But we do believe that the way this is written, that they, there's room for them within certain areas. And again, we talked about temporary uses, temporary residential uses. Has to be under the right circumstances, but that they don't have to be for a relative, and they could be anywhere in the state. They should be out of hazard areas, but you'll see some boosts in the it's still manufactured dwelling. It could be a couple of yurts, it could be 5 recreational vehicles, things of that nature. again, we presume that a recreational vehicle or camper trailer or a tent would be more easily removed, less likely to remain permanent if that wasn't the desired scenario. And then we've also built in with for unincorporated communities this opportunity, which is really there's this statute that applies inside urban growth boundaries. Doesn't apply to unincorporated communities. So what we've done is tried to say, okay, we accept that we can't extend the statute. That's the legislature's purview, but we think we can say in an unincorporated community you could have something that looks just like this. And so that's what we've done. And there's I didn't belabor the point by listing all the language there, but that really is for transitional housing accommodations. It really fits the I think the situation, and I know that some cities are looking at that as potential, and we have the language built in about being proximity to the damaged areas, and we'll talk about that again. Moving down, that gets us to agricultural lands. I just think it's a beautiful picture from the Department of Agriculture, and we'll know. You'll notice some cadence here. Here, wow, there's two temporary residences. This comes up first for agricultural lands because that's the way the existing rules operate. But again, it's just a lot. It's a big bunch of lines and stuff. But the emphasis is that we carve out a distinction between a medical hardship and a natural hazard event hardship. It does have to be relative in both instances here. That's a matter of statute. We can't change that. We don't have the same latitude that we have in other zones because this is all based on ORS Chapter 215. But we do have we can do some things around the edges, and this is one of them, I believe. So it has to be a relative. But in this instance, it may not be a manufactured home. Again, for the same reasons that we talked about in the forest zone, and we've also put together the same sort of kind of safe harbor for how you establish the relevant review criteria have been satisfied. So I'm going to see here. Moving into the campground piece again, it's very similar. ORS Chapter 215, 283, and 213 have had campgrounds listed for as long as I can remember. It's a long-standing use. LCDC has interpreted that language. Going back, we're working with Ron Eber and Blair Batson and some folks on that in the 90s. So it's something that's been around a long time. We've interpreted it a long time ago. It also has historically included the emergency language, but never really carried that forward. Really wasn't any need to. So we rearranged it. We've rearranged the language. We've created two categories: the vacation purposes and the emergency purposes. Again, the differences really are the emergency purposes are liberated from having to meet the amenities and so on and so forth that would be desired and needed in the other setting, but not so much here. And that you can have, you can't have sewer, you can't have water and power to each campground, each campsite, excuse me. And again, you'll see the same sort of arrangement of kind of that notion of safe harbor. And then finally, we're getting down to the last piece here is with regards to accessory farm dwellings. It didn't work out quite how I wanted, but what we did here is we just wanted to declare very clearly, front and center, accessory farm dwellings destroyed by a wildfire can be replaced. That's probably right, but we wanted to make sure it was. And furthermore, especially this time of the year, with stuff really ramping up in some industries, particularly the orchard industries, the temporary use of these alternative housing accommodations can be used until the replacement occurs. So we know there's been a lot of farm worker housing destroyed. In all honesty, I'm not sure how much that was on land zone for EFU, but we wanted to make sure it was accommodated. So I'm going to pause there for a moment and see if there's any questions. I'm going to check my phone. I have a feeling I might be getting texted by the director.
Any questions, commissioners, or comments? And it looks like we have 2 of the public members that have signed up for a comment as well. But before we do that, are there other comments commissioners have? Or questions? Yeah, Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine, John. Did you have anything else before we go to the public? I have just 2 big picture questions.
What I was going to offer is I did, maybe I don't need to, listening out last night, but I did try to sort of inventory, collect the comments that we'd received by noon yesterday. I can cover that ground real quickly, or we can let folks speak for themselves. I'm happy to do whatever is the commission's pleasure.
Before we go to comments, let's take any last commissioner thoughts or comments. And then I might suggest that we hear from the public. And then John, if there are additional things after hearing from the public that you heard prior, that we could layer those in. But anyone else on the commission have questions? Yeah, Commissioner Lilac and then Commissioner Warren. I see your hand up as well. Yeah, go for it, Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you. So two big picture questions. One question is just the nature of temporary rules and permanent rules. And my question is, whatever, and I assume we'll adopt something, if whatever we adopt, and then if permanent rules change it, and let me just use one example of it, and I'm not suggesting we go here, but this is an issue that's been raised by at least 3 people in their public comments, that there's no clear removal date for some of these temporary uses. They're 30 months with extensions. If we adopt temporary rules without a removal date, and then if permanent rules established a permanent date, such as 10 years, I don't know what the number would be, would that then come back and apply to those that would be approved or established under the temporary rules? I think about kind of Measure 37, then Measure 49 made changes to Measure 37, but I don't know how this works with temporary rules, and so that's one big picture question. And then just my second one is just to make sure I'm understanding everything I'm really seeing and hearing. Is it appears that everything is a county may. Or cities may, but it looks like there's nothing that is required. So there's a lot of choices that local governments will need to make in terms of whether they choose to apply these rules. So those are my 2 questions, and I'll put myself back on mute. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Lilac. I don't know, John or Kirsten, if you have a response to that question about the removal date.
So thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Lilac. Those are great questions. I think the first is a legal question. So we might draw on the expertise of Mr. Shipsey a little bit. Actually, both of them might not hurt from his input. My first blush sense is that certainly a use approved under the temporary rules would remain. It would not have to be removed, of course, after that sunsets, but whether there are new provisions that apply to the extension of that use, that could go either way, and that the may, you're right. We haven't written this with an attempt to be requiring counties to do things. We presume that they would use if they chose to, they'd use their existing process. Whatever that may be, whatever they saw fit, because these do need to in almost all cases would require a land use decision and some level of review. But again, I think there's a little hazy area there too. I'm uncertain on the absolute of, can a county just decline, or does that require the commissioners to adopt an order or resolution? saying we're not going to do this, or so on and so forth. So I'm not trying to muddy the waters any more than I have to. But yeah, we tried to have as much latitude, guidance with flexibility, right? Here's how things look, but some things really are going to be left to counties to figure out where that seems like the right thing to do. So, Vice Chair, Deputy Director Green, I don't know if you had anything to ask. I saw your light come on.
No, not much. Prefer to defer to Steve if he's available.
So this is Steve. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think Commissioner Lilac raises a potentially good thing to be thinking about, and I'll maybe touch base with John if we take a break here at 2:30. But my thought is it would be easier to put in a removal time in the temporary rule. And then if we determine in permanent rulemaking that that's really not feasible, we could remove it there. And obviously no one utilizing the temporary rule would have come up against it yet. So because I haven't done the work on it yet, my thought was let's go ahead and put in a time frame and have it as an issue to consider in the permanent rulemaking. And I'll go back on mute.
Thank you for that. All right, it feels like that supports what the concern was, Commissioner Lilac, to be able to make that adjustment. So let's move to Commissioner Warren, your question.
Yeah, so my question here is, okay, what happens after the temporary housing is hit this, kind of deadline? So does that property then go back to its original kind of usage? For example, using urban reserves. So say we put in, 1,000 temporary homes on urban reserves, what then happens after the deadline? And do we have any verbiage to ensure that those properties don't just, then get, brought into the actual city limits and built out? I think that it would warrant our discussion to figure something out along those lines, because I have a feeling there are certain individuals who are looking at this to capitalize for their own gain. So I just want to make sure we have that discussion as well. And then just kind of a general question. I noticed in a few places that kind of the disasters were limited to wildfire, and hopefully underneath our temporary rules, we don't have to use or have any other sort of disasters happen to us. But it might make sense to just ensure that we don't have, it just limited to wildfires. Maybe you want to start including things like mudslides, hopefully not Cascadia, and some of these other events. And those are my two questions.
Great, thank you. John, do you want to respond to those two questions?
Thank you, Vice Chair Permanent and Commissioner Warren. So we've tried to build in, a substantial amount of language that says once it's done, once it's no longer needed, it goes out, it comes out. It's not the basis for can't serve as a basis for a future zone change. So you can't claim, well, geez, we're irrevocably committed or physically developed because we've had these FEMA trailers here. Therefore, we should be R2 now. We've deliberately tried to eliminate those possibilities. What we haven't done is specify, what retirement means. We said it has to come out, but we haven't said so far. We haven't been inclined to go the next step, which is to say, it needs to go away and the property needs to be returned to its previous use or recovered, or something like that. That I think that's a little more detailed conversation, but absolutely, we want these to be assets for the communities and they're limited, not liabilities. We don't want to inadvertently disrupt a community's urbanization aspirations what they want to be. You don't want to accidentally result in greater gentrification or a lesser amount of important affordable housing opportunities. We want it to be uplifting and helpful, but not do the things that we don't want to have happen in our communities. So I would think that there is certainly room to talk about what it takes, and that's why we really emphasize the public agency aspect of that Goal 14 exception, because we're hopeful that if it's a public agency, we started out saying FEMA, but then we realized that's up in the air. I think hopefully there's been more good news than bad lately. But FEMA takes the trailers out when they're done, right? I mean, I think that's what I understand. So again, that may or may not come to pass here, but we're hopeful that, with that public agency emphasis, that we're more likely to get compliance. It's more likely that those plans are going to be, recovered, returned to the original state when they're no longer needed. But we haven't articulated, what retirement. We haven't said you have to post a bond to ensure that it gets retired appropriately. Anything quite like that. Wow. Second point, great one. We have focused on wildfire in this rendition. We certainly don't want to limit ourselves moving forward. It knows what the next one's going to be. There's going to be a next one. So we can work with some language in this setting. We can make sure that it's carried forward in the next piece. Again, I think that's to the commissioner's pleasure what they would like to see done, but absolutely, we do not want to say this is just for wildfire and we're not worried about landslides or whatever else it is, right? So thank you very much for those comments.
Great, thank you. Looks like Josh is able to respond as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit because I know we provided some background context of kind of the situation down here at your last commission meeting. But when we were originally talking about creating this rule to allow essentially transitional housing or interim housing on urban reserves, we were initially thinking that would likely be the place where FEMA would put housing. Since then, our conversations with FEMA have progressed a bit, and it appears that vacant, undeveloped land is the last priority for FEMA to put housing. It's the most costly. They have to bring in infrastructure and scrape a site and put pads down. So we've been exploring a lot of other options with them, looking at existing RV parks in the area, and also looking at existing buildings such as the SOU, the Southern Oregon University dormitories, to potentially retrofit. But at the same time, so we have FEMA, which will likely not be putting their housing and taking advantage of the rules that we're doing right now. We have to recognize that there's a substantial portion of the folks who are displaced that won't be applying and eligible for FEMA housing for a variety of reasons. And so to me right now, this opportunity really represents a place where the private sector, potentially with state cooperation and nonprofit involvement, to be able to place some homes on these sites independently. The trick with that is, as Mr. Jennings pointed out, is FEMA has a time frame. They have an 18-month clock that starts at the date of the disaster. And there's a little bit of wiggle room with that, but they pull those units out. That's federal money. They have requirements. The problem that I think that has been pointed out by Commissioner Warren and other folks is if this happens on the private sector side, even if they have support from the community to do it in the first place, if 5 years from now, or 6 years from now, there's still a housing shortage, which there likely will be, is that pressure then going to be put on the communities to keep that as, as housing, and it becomes de facto permanent? So, we're really trying to balance a lot of things here, trying to be responsive as an agency to provide housing, but we shouldn't lose sight of the potential ramifications in the future. I don't have an answer, but I think one of the suggestions that was pointed out is to put a time frame on the limit basically the time extensions. I think that's probably something we would advise. Otherwise, I don't really have any good value to be able to contribute here.
Thank you for sharing and for the insight of what's going on in Southern Oregon too. So that's really helpful. Commissioner Jacobson, did you have your hand raised or did I?
I did not, but I wanted to. So I
read your mind.
You read my mind. Yeah. Just kind of building up off what staff had just said. I want to make sure, and I think we are, I want to make sure that we're not doing this just with FEMA in mind. Because for example, Lincoln County has not qualified for a housing mission from FEMA, and we may not. And so it may be, you know, the nonprofit sector or even local governments or what have you that may need to step in and actually create some type of housing plan. So it may not be, FEMA may not be the agency that's doing this. And so I just want to keep that in mind, that we can't be building process for one particular agency that may or may not be serving a particular community. But I think we're doing that.
Thank you for bringing that up. All right, we're getting close to our 2:30 mark. So I am gonna do sort of a last call for commissioners, and then we can take a break, hear from the public, and then John, what we don't hear, and if you wanna add more that we didn't hear that you heard earlier, we can do that. Any last comments? And then I'm wondering, I guess the other piece is, John, if you and Steve would want to get together related to some of these pieces that we talked about related to timing, and or do you want to do that later to potentially suggest some changes?
Thank you, Mr. What I would recommend Mr. Shipp to give me a call during the break, and we can chat briefly about that. I think that'd be just fine.
Great. All right, other commissioners, questions before we take a break? All right, I think we can head into our break then. And then again, John, thank you. It was a lot of detail and really great work in the short amount of time. And it's, we're here with you along this. So because it's 2:25.
Thank you all so much for your patience.
Are people good coming back at 2:40? Does that work for folks? Sound good? Okay.
It's good. I was just going to say, I just want to make sure that John and Steve have enough time to coordinate. Or
yeah, does that give you enough time, John? Because we could come back at,
I believe it does.
okay.
I think
Great. All right, well, we will be back at 2:40. We'll see you all soon. Great, looks like commissioners are still arriving, so we'll just wait one more minute.
Esther and Vice Chair Steve Shipsey hasn't yet rejoined us.
Thank you. Sorry. All right, it looks like commissioners are here, excluding Commissioner Warren. And then thank you, Casaria, for pointing out that we're waiting on Steve as well. We'll give it just another minute once he gets back in. Commissioner Jacobson has an assistant that she is joining us.
You're stealing my drink.
All right, should we need to wait for Steve, don't we, before we continue?
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. No worries. Is that right, Deputy Director? We need to wait for Steve.
And that you'd be thank you. And that you'd be looking for clarifications. That's probably warranted. I'll give him a quick call on his cell and see what's going on. Thank you. Just a moment, please. Hi, Vice Chair Piermine. Steve is trying to join us. He's been having Comcast at his house working on the internet, so he's able to now join via the internet, not just his phone. So he should be right with us this moment, please.
Sounds good.
Did affirm, Vice Chair, that he and John were able to confer at the break, and that was complete. So just waiting for the connectivity now, a very 2020 moment. Sorry.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay, and I show Mr. Shipsey. Could you confirm that you can hear me? I cannot hear you.
Esther, that's a different phone number, so I'm just being hopeful right now that it is Steve Shipsey, but
Okay. See.
Oh, there he is. Mr. Shipsey, can you hear us?
Yes,
All
yes.
right.
And thank Comcast for an emergency repair today.
Thank you, Comcast and technology. It is amazing. All right, so we are back from our break, and we left without yet hearing from our public. So I know we had 2 folks from the public that are ready to address us. Oh, now it looks like 3. So we'll do, let's hear from the public. I think we can have each member spend 3 minutes. I'll set a timer and just kind of leave my volume open so you can hear my chimes going when your time is complete. And then if we have some questions for you or clarifications, we can spend that time as a commission getting those clarifications. And then after these comments, John, you can add anything else that you heard from folks previous. And then we can hear from you related to conversations with Mr. Shipsey as well. So Esther, do you want to take it from here and let me know, and I can then set the timer?
And Casaria will be helping me with moving the public over as panelists. And there is a brief pause as we switch folks over.
Thank you, Casaria and Esther.
Mary Kyle, you should be ready to speak.
Thank you. This is Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends of Oregon. I want to first thank John Jennings and Jocelyn Bombard, who have done an incredible job in a short period of time and have also really reached out to as many and as wide a group as they could to get input on this. So I'm going to address 2 issues. The first one was the issue of time extensions in a temporary rule, but I think Commissioners Warren and Lilac have, illustrated this as a larger issue of the relationship between a temporary rule and a permanent rule. But it seems to us a temporary rule should not have indefinite time extensions, that there should be something in it that is a limit that can always be changed in a permanent rule. But we hope you don't let the perfect rule get in the way of accomplishing what you need to accomplish now in a temporary rule. And so I'll leave that at that. And then secondly, moving to the other issue is inside urban growth boundaries. This rule is about how to make it easier to site housing outside urban growth boundaries. And I understand that. And we've submitted some tweaks and edits to Mr. Jennings on this. But the original memo and what we still think the commission should do is also making it easier to cite these uses inside urban growth boundaries. It would still have to be on the application of a city. They're still in the driver's seat. But we know that there are administrative rules that could get in the way or potentially could be used to get in the way of citing temporary housing on lands that are not currently zoned for residential use, like underdeveloped strip mall, an industrial piece of land that's otherwise appropriate but isn't going to be developed for a while, use of motels and even maybe the Southern Oregon University dorms. I don't know, but I think we want to make cities in that driver's seat, because as I know we've heard, and I'm sure Commissioner Warren's heard and others have, that those displaced by the wildfires want their temporary housing to be in or as close to the communities from which they were displaced, near their schools, their services, their places of faith, their communities, and especially families with children want to be nearby. So that should be the easiest that should happen. And so we ask that you add that to this rule in some way appropriate today or in the very near future. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Mary Kyle. Commissioners, any questions? Yes.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
When talking about timelines and extensions, do you have a particular, time frame in your head that you think about that would be appropriate? Or
Commissioner Jacobson, we threw out there 5 years because that seemed reasonable, but I think between those of you who are closest to communities, again, it's a temporary rule. In 180 days, you will be making decisions about what's the appropriate number of extensions, I would think, or a cap on the overall time, as well as what are the criteria for granting an extension. There's one pretty simple criteria in the temporary rule, which maybe it was Commissioner Warren mentioned earlier, about whether or not or maybe it was Josh, an adequate amount of housing in the community, and that you may want to, that's a big lift in a lot of Oregon communities right now, right? But you also might want to have some other criteria there about whether or not a site is still appropriate for housing use. It may not be an appropriate place because of sewage disposal, for example, or some other infrastructure for longer term. So we threw out 5 years or a certain number of extensions, but it's really, it could be more or less what we're not wedded, just the idea that there would be a cap on the number of extensions or the overall time frame in a temporary rule. Mm-hmm.
Awesome, thank you. Other commissioners? Yep, Commissioner Holloway.
Because there was a lot of different language and different sections that's being edited, when you said that this would be allowed in the urban growth boundary areas, was there a simple, and you might have written in your testimony, was there a simple edit that one could make, or was it more extensive? And I just wanted to ask you, but obviously the staff has to respond to that.
Commissioner Holloway, we did not suggest language, just the concept, because it's not particularly addressed in the rule at all. And I really leave it to Steve Shipsey and your staff to figure out where that would go. The sections of rules that are addressed in this temporary rule are for needs outside of an urban growth boundary. So it's a different possibly overlapping, but some different rules that would have to be amended. So for example, you have some rules in your Goal 9 rule that put in place some challenges to using industrial land for non-industrial purposes, or at least rezoning it. This wouldn't be a rezone presumably, but I wouldn't want a hurdle to be used to block trailers going in on an appropriate site that a city wants to use. I don't have any particular city or site in mind, so I don't want to, just because say some neighbors don't want the trailers there. So I know there's some other rules that aren't addressed here at all, and I would not want to pretend that I could be, comprehensive on that list.
All right, thank you for responding and the question. For process, John, would you prefer to do all public comments and then at the end tie in these questions that came through, or would you like to pause and respond for each comment?
Oh, so thank you, Vice Chair. I had assumed that we would go through the folks offering comments and then kind of do mullet. I'm happy to do whatever you would like. So I will. Well,
let's do that.
So very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So we can flag these questions to return to that Mary Kyle brought up for us. Thank you so much for your comment, and then we can move to our next public member.
Next is Craig Anderson.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, my name is Craig Anderson. I am representing Rogue Advocates. We are a Southern Oregon land use organization that's been active in Jackson County for about 20 years and Josephine County. My background is as a planner for Jackson County for 12 years. And our comments were summarized basically in the Exhibit 8. I believe it's been exhibited under that number. Basically, I want to get into a somewhat technical issue, and that has to do with Jackson County's code and the type of process that Jackson County would typically allow for addressing the emergency that we're talking about. And that is, in my comments, it's on page 3, and it gets to, I think, all of the issues that John Jennings has tried to address in the rules. Basically, Jackson County's code allows for any structures to be constructed as a result of a declared emergency without any site plan requirements. It's basically a blank check for an applicant to address natural disasters as need be anywhere in the county, and that's through a type 1 process. So John Jennings and I had a discussion about the language that's being proposed being discretionary in nature, meaning for Jackson County, that would be a type 2 application, which it has noticing requirements. It's subject to appeal. It's a significantly different process than an over-the-counter type 1 process, which Jackson County currently allows. So then the natural question is, what is the need for these rule changes for Jackson County? And then in the bulk of our comments, we go a little bit further into getting to the question of need. And it simply hasn't been demonstrated. This is purportedly to address the emergency sheltering needs of a specific population, but there's no limitations in the rules, there's no limitations on who gets to take advantage of these structures or these accommodations. And I also go into a description of the way that temporary uses work in the real world, which is the state has nothing to do with enforcing these rules. Once a use is approved, the state's out of the picture. It's up to the county to do code enforcement. And like I said in here, the county is loath to enforce zoning regulations just in general, but much less go onto people's property and have them removed from their residence, whether that be a yurt or tent or RV, whatever that is. Is that my?
That's your time, but go ahead and wrap up your thinking here. So, but that is
basically, I just want to say that, I had a few days to review these changes. It may be that DLCD staff did outreach that I wasn't aware, but they certainly didn't contact us. And this has been a lightning fast process as far as I can tell. These are sweeping changes to the rules that protect livability in Oregon. And the concern is that we could have, and I'm sure this will happen. We have land use planners that serve the marijuana growing population that will be out there the day after this goes into effect and getting those temporary uses established, and then doing their best to make sure those become lawfully established non-conforming structures. And it'll be very difficult, if not impossible, for the county to get rid of those structures. And it's going to be potentially add an extreme level of danger to the situations that we had in terms of wildfire. And so I really caution the commission to adopt this language today. Certainly, I would hope that they would make the changes in terms of the temporary language that's already been flagged.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So appreciate your comments and letter. Do commissioners have questions for Mr. Anderson? Commissioner Lilac, and then looks like Commissioner Holloway.
I'll be happy to defer to Commissioner Holloway. I think she had her hands up first.
Yeah. My question just had to do with the last sentence you said, that you would like us to delay in order to incorporate, and I just want to make sure to know what you were referencing when you just said that last sentence.
Yeah, the concern is, obviously we have a lot of people that are impacted in Jackson County and throughout the state, and there's a will to get things going as quickly as possible. I would just caution that, there hasn't been a lot of eyes on this language. There has not been any public review that I'm aware of. And, the code language that Jackson County has in place has been acknowledged by the state. It has had that review. Those types of safeguards are already built into code language. They're not built into these rule changes. I don't see the necessity in adopting these under the time frame that is being laid out here. I would request that the public be given more of an opportunity to understand what the implications of these changes are. And having been a planner and having seen temporary uses become de facto permanent uses, I would just caution you that it's very difficult. Once someone is given an opportunity to establish a dwelling, however temporary it looks, they're going to be very reluctant, especially if they're renting it out or it's being used by a relative. They're going to be very reluctant to give that up, and the county is going to be very reluctant to take that away from them.
Thank you. Commissioner Leland.
Thank you. And Craig, thank you for your comments. And it's always great to have a practicing or former practicing planner weigh in on code, especially and how it may play out. My question probably is for John regarding the type 2 use, the discretionary use. As I understand it, the way the rules are written is that Jackson County would likely have the discretion in how to apply this code. I mean, they could choose to do it through a type 2 type of a land use application, or they may be able to directly implement it through another process, just per the temporary rules. I'm just trying to understand that piece of this, because there are the discretionary language, as I think Craig and maybe others pointed out, where it says, for example, to the extent possible. Well, that, of course, anytime we say something like that, that is going to be discretionary language. So, John, I'm just interested in your perspectives on that.
Oh, looks like you're muted, John.
Apologize for that. Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Lilac. So I have to confess, I'm not familiar. One time I was, well, with what type 1 and type 2 is, and we don't need to go into that now. But what I would say is that I believe that we certainly, the most probable interpretation is that this language does involve some discretion, some discretionary standards. And I'm talking about the campground temporary use stuff in rural residential areas, but it carries forward from there too. In particular, so the county may approve without amendments and so on and so forth. But it says when a natural hazard event has caused a need for sheltering and interim housing opportunities, presumably that requires a response. And, that could be questioned, is there a need or is there not a need? Now we can be assisted in making that if there are, statewide proclamations or other things that we could rely on. But I think chances are that it's likely that processing an application would be required to provide notice and opportunity for hearing. Would be my guess, which is customary. That's not out of practice. It's certainly different than with the kind of blank check, get out of jail free card with which was described in the Jackson County emergency situations. But it's certainly usual customary for most land use activities on rural lands. I don't think it'd be more than that ordinarily provided, but I think that I don't think if push came to shove that it would end up saying this is a use that can be just allowed. You just sign a land use compatibility statement or some sort of non-discretionary permit. I think it does require judgment and notice and opportunity for hearing in most cases. That hopefully, Commissioner Leac, hopefully somewhere in that rambling, hopefully I wandered across your question.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? All right. We can move to our next public comment. And thank you, Mr. Anderson, for your comment. So Mr. Harland, is that right?
Yes, Mr. J. Harland.
Correct. Can you hear me? You can?
Okay. Yep.
For the record, Jay Harlan with CSA Planning with offices at 4497 Brown Ridge in Medford. Thank you this afternoon for taking our testimony. I just have a couple things. One is I had provided a letter to the record, and I just wanted to clarify upon Mr. Jennings diligently going through the rule. I think one of my issues, which was the individual hookups for electrical for the temporary campgrounds, it appears that has been addressed. And so I would kind of tweak my comment to say I support the staff on that issue and to allow the temporary electrical and water hookups as part of these temporary, the temporary campground issues. One thing responding to I think the concern of Mr. Anderson and really a couple of the other questions that the commissioners have, and Mr. Jennings did speak to this a little bit, which would be the bonding issue as it relates to temporary uses. That's pretty common in development. My idea there would be not that the commission necessarily mandate bonding, but it might not make sense for both the goal exception side of this and also the campground side of it to put in the rule that counties may impose bonding requirements for the temporary nature of the use, and then leave it to the counties to it's kind of a signal to the counties that the state is thinking that might be a good idea. And in my experience, when the state sends those signals in the rules, a lot of counties think about it and go, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And that really does sort of cures a lot of those issues. And it once people have to go and post a bond for something, they're only doing it if they think if it really makes sense to do. As to the percentages that the commission was discussing related in the goal exception part of it, I would just note that those percentages, especially for the urban unincorporated community of 50%, that number seems really high. And there are some big urban unincorporated communities, like in the case of White City, there's like 7,000 people. So if you had to hit the 50% level, I mean, they weren't damaged in this fire, but going forward, there may be some permanent rulemaking. I mean, you're talking about, 30, something like 1,500 houses before you would hit that. So my idea would be more, and I think some of the commission was going down this path, would be maybe a percentage of, at least 20% and not less than 100 homes. And then you could put something in that goal exception. I mean, you're doing a goal exception there, so that's plan amendment. You could put something in there that says the county shall make findings that the proposed amount of housing is roughly proportional to the community impacted. It's a goal exception is you're not going to make that clear and objective no matter how you do it. I mean, you're doing a goal exception. So there's findings and somebody can challenge it. So I just don't see an issue with putting a proportionality in there. And then that also kind of takes care of the iterative nature. You might get multiple goal exceptions in the same community. Well, then you have a kind of a queue. And at a certain point, they've issued as many as can be considered roughly proportional. And then the county has also a good basis to say, thank you for your goal exception, but we've provided enough housing within the community to deal with the issue. And point of fact, your regional rep would probably provide that comment by goal exception 2 or 3 or 6 or however many it is based upon the size of properties are necessary to kind of make deal with the particular impact. So those are my comments, and I would be happy to answer any questions that the commission has.
Thank you, Mr. Harland. Appreciate that. Any questions from commissioners? Doesn't look like it. Thank you so much for your time and comments and written testimony too. So we will be definitely taking them into consideration. All right. So our next public member is Ms. Lynch.
Peggy Lynch.
Good afternoon, commissioners. You can hear me, I gather. Thank you. Vice Chair Pearmine and members of the commission, Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon, and you have our letter before you. I just wanted to mention a few things. The League has local leagues around the state, many of them throughout most of Western Oregon, and 3 in the eastern part of the state, including Hermiston, Klamath Falls, and Deschutes County. So as I speak, I'm sort of talking for them as well. You do have our letter and the personal email I sent to John. I didn't expect to see on the web, but hey, what can I tell you? I wanted to make sure that he got the concern I had about the sewer, water, and electric so that he could be thinking about it. Above all, we support you taking action today on this issue. You've heard some great suggestions about some tweaks that need to happen, but we really believe this needs to happen. I'm not going to go over the items line by line, and many of you have seen my letter and you have heard me in the past say that I am frustrated that state agency silos often get in the way of taking care of issues. And this really is about people's lives. And so it's more than about just land use. So as I focus land use on with your work today, I want to make sure that people understand that there are other things that need to happen to help heal these people's lives. I also wanted to share, in case you have not known, that on Friday, the e-board will be considering offering additional dollars to help purchase hotels and motels. So it may take a little bit of the concern off, but only a little bit, because we have over 4,000 homes and we know that. So focusing on the land use, and I think some of it has been addressed, but just so that you do understand, it's my understanding that with FEMA, should they use the trailers opportunity, that they can provide above ground sewer and water. So it doesn't go in ground, and therefore when the trailers go, so does the infrastructure. On the other hand, if it's going to be in a place where we want that infrastructure, we want to use the most of FEMA dollars that we can to make sure that we can take benefit of those federal dollars. I heard that you just said that you've taken care of the generators issue that was just brought up, because that was a great concern. I still have some concerns about, and I am hopeful that it will be the responsibility of the counties to make sure that working with DEQ, that in these places where they need septics or potable water, that there is a mechanism for doing that. And you've talked about the clarity without the dates, so I'm interested in listening to that conversation. I do believe that we need to remember that this is a temporary rule. So as long as the issue about whether or not what you decide today has to go forward to a certain extent, one would presume that you could select an earlier date that could be extended. What you can't do is select a later date and then reduce it. So I think that's a particular importance. And then listening to your conversations today, the percentages also have some concern in that I do want to make sure that Phoenix can take advantage of this rule, but I also don't want to extend that percentage to an unreasonable matter. We do have the opportunity to do this in a permanent rulemaking later. And I think what I heard was I had a timer and I'm all done. Is that correct?
That is Ms. Lynch. Yes.
Okay. So I'm welcome to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. Any questions from commissioners? All right, it doesn't look like any questions, Ms. Lynch, and thank you so much for your comments and detailed notes as well. So thank you. All right, do we have any more members of the public? Or was that a full list?
That was the entire list.
Great. So grateful for everyone's comments and thorough your time spent to go through all of the details. Really, really helps us when we're considering things. So thank you very much. I'm wondering, John, if you want to take it from here, really, and Steve, related to your discussion and also addressing these questions that we have. We can essentially, we have to consider a motion at some point, but we can have our discussion, we can have reactions to public comment and letters, and then potentially we'll entertain a motion and have any further discussion after that. But if you want to pick up from what you heard and your discussion over the break.
So yes, thank you, Vice Chair Perman. So Steve and I did visit about a couple of things over the break, and I think that the conclusion that we came to was that it made probably the most sense from a, or probably the safest choice would be to have a limitation on the number of extensions that could be offered. I think we could do this pretty quickly and easily. I think we can. I think I've actually got some language that might show how that would be done. We may want to go through some of the other comments, and I kind of go back through that. And we talked about the applicability language and or issue, and and agreed. Counties may do this. They're not. It's not a directive to have to do it, and. I think it seems like we talked about some other thing, or at least one other thing, but I think it was our opinion, whatever it was, that was probably wasn't worthy. You know what? I do remember what it was. I think we did conclude that we did need further investigation today. So that's a summary. I asked Mr. Shipsey if he had any other recollections, if I've gotten that wrong.
No, you got
okay.
It. Thanks.
Great. So thanks for that. I'm wondering, do we want to ask commissioners, based on public comment, if you have additional questions for Mr. Jennings? Looks like Commissioner Warren, you're first.
Yeah, so I just want to revisit these percentages of homes destroyed in order to qualify. So I had a nice conversation with Mr. Lombard during the break, and he mentioned that he thinks we should lower the 30% to something like 15%. But that also brought up the question, okay, so maybe we need to be thinking outside the box as well, since we're a state commission of the Rogue Valley, and the 50% number kind of brings up questions to me, you know, does that help some of these other communities that are rural communities or unincorporated lands? Are they going to have the ability to use this temporary rule to their, you know, to help those folks find housing? So do we need to look at a lowering that number as well, John? What are your feelings there?
So thank you, Vice Chair and Commissioner Warren. I agree. You know, we did have this on an expedited time frame, but you know, like I said, we did reach out and talk to folks. I didn't get much feedback. I was hoping, you know, we'd get more feedback on that, and they'd say, no, this is where you need to go. But I think, you know, frankly, I think folks are still sort of really trying to just get their arms around it. You know, even though seems like it's been a little while, I think there's still a lot of unknowns. But you know what? We need to adopt a rule today, and it needs to be one that works. And to make sure that I think we want to, you know, if we have to set our sights a little low to make sure that it's going to work, I think that's okay. You know, I think if there's any time to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, is now. So what I scribbled down, and Josh Mr. Bombard had you know what, if that's where he's at, that's where I'm at. And he's our representative down there, knows it better than anybody else. With regard to unincorporated communities, again, I've been uncertain on what the right piece would be. If 50% is felt to be too hard, you know, maybe 25%, maybe 15%. I don't know. Again, we wanted to try to have, you know, some sort of relevance, but not set the bar too high so it doesn't work. And again, I really appreciated some of Mr. Harlan's comments about, you know, proportionality and so on and so forth. I think that conversation is better served when we have the time to vet it through it more thoroughly. But I think it you know, it offers a good start. So anyway, to tie this off, Commissioner Warren, I would say, you know, my personal recommendation would certainly be to drop that number to 15% for urban growth boundaries, and then also if it's felt the right thing to do, to drop it for unincorporated communities too. I think it serves our purpose relatively high for rural residential exception areas for a number of reasons. But you know, within what is truly the built environments, I think we want to make sure that, you know, we capture everybody that needs help.
Great. Commissioner Warren, is that sufficient? Great. Commissioner Jacobson, and then did I see Commissioner Lilac? Did you have your hand up as well?
I didn't yet, but
okay.
I'm just ready for deliberations whenever you're ready to proceed, but I'll defer back to you.
Great. Commissioner Jacobson,
I would just add that I am in support of dropping that number in the unincorporated parts as well. In addition, just to realize that at least what happened with us is we had multiple, you know, unincorporated communities that lost homes. So it wasn't one unincorporated community. It was Rose Lodge, it was Otis, Panther Creek. And so we want to make sure that, you know, as a fire burns through multiple areas, you don't have to hit 50% in every single one. So I think that number coming down is important.
Great, thank you. All right. Other commissioners, anything more for John? All right, Commissioner Warren.
And just one more thing, you know, based off of what Mary Kyle brought up, you know, the fact that we don't have any of these rules for inside the UGB, I just wanted to hear maybe some staff response on that. Like, is that necessary? Is that something we can add after we adopt this temporary rule today, or is it even necessary, I guess?
So thank you, Vice Chair and Commissioner Warren. So I think it's a good question. And I'm not sure exactly what the answer is. I think that there could be a benefit into exploring it further. I'd also say that, as has been pointed out, many have quickly adopted emergency ordinances and allowing for certain things to happen with regard to RVs on, so on and so forth. And furthermore, one of our touchstone statutes, the ORS 44665, does contemplate this exact sort of thing and authorize it to happen inside of urban growth boundaries. So again, I don't know. I think that Thousand Friends Oregon point is spot on. We should be making sure we can do what we can do to make facilitate these happening in urban growth boundaries. Whether temporary rules are necessary, I don't know, but I think we should look into it. So I personally, I would be in favor of the department doing a little more homework and offering follow up at your next meeting or as you see fit, right? But again, obviously I'm not prepared to make any changes. I just don't know enough about it today. We would definitely want to coordinate with the League of Oregon Cities and other of our urban friends to make sure we're on the right pathway. And so we may find that it's absolutely a good thing, or may find that it really is something that is taking care of itself. So I'll just stop there, and hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Yes. Thank you, John. It looks like Deputy Director Green has something, and then Commissioner Lilac.
Sorry, Commissioner Lilac. Thanks, Vice Chair Piermine. I just wonder if we could triage or maybe sort the issues that we hope to kind of sort through in the rule today, vis-a-vis ones that we might refine in permanent. With respect to the urban areas, Gordon has emailed, and also he's online now if you'd like to call upon him. But John just mentioned it, that there is, in statute ORS 446 sub 265 that allows for transitional housing accommodations inside urban growth boundaries. But I think we'd like the time to do some additional research on what that means for employment areas and or industrial areas, but wouldn't want to get in the way of a temporary rule if that's the Commission's will today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Kirsten answered exactly the question I was going to ask, is what additional flexibility do cities need inside urban growth boundaries? And if they do need additional flexibility, then perhaps we could tackle those through a separate temporary rule to provide as maximum flexibility possible with as much local control, so that cities can decide what, where, when, how to meet this need. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any more comments or questions for staff? All right, Commissioner Hollova.
My comments and question, well, this isn't really a question. My comments are deliberation. So I didn't know we're like halfway between. So are we in deliberation or?
We're trying to get there.
Okay. So I won't say anything.
So we're vetting any more discussion before we move there. All right. Deputy Director, did you have?
I just wonder, just a little sort of procedural question here. So commissioners are asking about deliberation, and I don't know if they mean after a motion has been raised, but perhaps there is time before a motion is actually raised for us to just recap the issues that we do want to work through. So we work those through, and so we have a more clean motion with amendments, because I think definitely a few have been raised today, not the least of which the threshold.
That sounds great. Do you want to lead us through that with John? And then we will, after that gets clarified, entertain an adjusted motion.
Appreciate that.
Maybe I want to do my comments first then.
Yeah, please.
I'm somewhere in between, so I don't know where to fit in. Sure. So I heard the issue about the urban growth boundary inside versus outside, and something need to be addressed there. Something about the time limits, but I feel like that's been solved, or somebody's going to solve that shortly. The only thing I didn't really hear about per se is this idea of the housing being temporary but becoming permanent, because local jurisdictions can't enforce, or it's very hard for them to enforce, you know, once a temporary housing has been set. And that whole conversation seemed big to me. And I didn't know if it's okay because we're leaving it up to the jurisdictions or the cities to figure it out. Like, okay, we're doing this temporary one, and since they have to enact it anyway, they'll figure out that part. We'll leave it up to them, or whether we need to figure that out first. And so if it was that we need to figure out first, it was making me all go, why don't we wait to the November meeting? You know, like, why doesn't the staff go back and figure all that out and get more public comment and then wait till the November meeting to pass this temporary order? But then I heard Peggy say, like, we need this now. And it just didn't seem very long from now, like a couple of weeks, but that could be a lot. I don't know. And so I think between the urban growth boundary inside issue and the how do we ensure that this doesn't cause a problem at the local level with things becoming permanent that are not supposed to be permanent and in their locations that we're talking about, between those two, with the need to pass something today or not, I was hoping somebody could talk about that, because they seem big enough to me to push it to the actual meeting in November, but I don't want to hold anybody back. And if they can be sorted at the local level, then, or they are intended to be solved at the local level, then I don't have a problem with doing something today. But if they can't be, then I kind of do have a problem with doing it today.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Hollova. It looks like Deputy Director Green, you were going to respond.
If I may, Chair Perman and Commissioner Hollova, I just worry a little bit about the agenda in November, having been framing that up. You have a very busy agenda in November. The first day, November 12th, is devoted to 3 sets of rulemaking on housing and wrapping that up. And pretty full agenda on Friday as well. You have about an hour and a half between 8 and 5 that aren't programmed currently. So I just want to sensitize us all that whatever we can accomplish today, I think is smart, both in terms of expediency, but then also in terms of the pressures on your November agenda. That's all I had for now. I'm just trying to keep track for our next moment when we sort of set this maybe side by side document up of what we addressed today and what we want to make sure to accommodate either in another temporary rule in November adjustment or the permanent rule. That's all.
So I guess the question I need answered is who's solving is this temporary housing going to become permanent issue? Is it us through our rulemaking, or is it at the local jurisdiction when they enact whatever they enact?
Vice Chair Perman, Commissioner Hollova, I defer to John again on that. He's given a great deal of thought on that. John.
Thank you, and I apologize for this dog here. But Vice Chair, Deputy Director, and Commissioner Hollova. So I would say it's a little bit of both. I would say that we have, we've written the rules with the understanding that enforcement could be at the end of this. So, that's exactly why, for instance, we're, temporary residences in this instance aren't manufactured dwellings. They are RVs or something that would be more likely to be removed at the end of the term. We have built-in language that says, this is supposed to go away. Now, it's a pretty fair point. Just because something says that doesn't mean that people are going to be jumping up and down with joy to do that. But, with the most significant opportunity, that Goal 14 exception, we've tied it to a public agency. There's a public agency emphasis there. A public agency has to be the applicant, and they have to specify the community in their application to the county. So, again, we tried to build in some safeguards. I think the conversation more but we tried to build up some safeguards that will hopefully help avoid, a genuine and unpleasant enforcement situation. And then, of course, counties have the ability to decide whether they want to do this or not. I given the description of the Jackson County program. Maybe they will elect not to use it. I will say that we did talk to Jackson County staff as well as City of Talent staff and others, and they didn't mention it. So that, who knows? I don't know what that means. But anyway, so I think it's a combination. I think we're trying to build these rules in a way that help avoid accomplish. And then on the other side, counties have the ability to decide whether to do it. They have presumably have the ability to apply conditions. Frankly, I personally like the idea. I want that to mature a little bit more before we offer that as part of the rule. But I think the comments from the public comments were right on with regard to that feature. But so again, we've tried to structure the rule in a way that's conducive to both things, and we think counties have some ability to influence that as well.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just want to, and I appreciate the issue that was raised with code enforcement, and Commissioner Halava, you're asking that question again. Counties enforce county codes, state laws differently across the county. Jackson County has 3 code enforcement staff members. We have 4. Multnomah County has 1. And so it really is going to be a local issue. And that's an issue for residents to raise with the Jackson County Board of Commissioners, frankly, if they don't like the way that it's happening. But I would not want that to be Jackson County's decision to, and I know that Jackson County's Community Development Director and Planning Manager are both participants right now watching this, which is great, and they can respond to this question separately, not now, but separately if they wish. But I would hate for us to make a decision, and I'm not suggesting that we would, but if Jackson County's not enforcing it as the rogue advocates would like them to penalize the rest of the state, where we do have robust code enforcement programs, and we do make sure that temporary housing does not become permanent, and particularly in this case when the temporary housing is specifically designed to house temporarily the disaster survivors from these most recent fires. So it sounds like they've got a different issue to address in Jackson County with code enforcement. I know other counties do as well, but I wouldn't want that to be that's not going to influence my decision today on how Jackson County does or does not enforce their code.
Thank you for adding that layer, Commissioner Lilac. Commissioner Jacobson.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this is already happening. I mean, people already have RVs parked everywhere, all over my community doing this. And so, you know, we need to pass this, but whether or not we pass it or not, it's still going to happen. And then it comes down to local jurisdictions and whether or not they're going to enforce the current code they have or not when it comes to those things. So, you know, just a note that, you know, we can kind of pontificate about the what ifs here, but it's already happening. And the idea of setting precedents for, you know, long-term, you know, implications is certainly there, but it's happened already. There's already people setting up camp literally in certain places where that's not the intended use. And so I understand that this takes precedent, and there is some worry about, you know, temporary rules that become permanent rules, but it is already happening now in communities, regardless of whether or not this passes. It's happening right now. And I just wanted to kind of put that on the table for people to understand that people had nowhere to go. And so if you have a trailer or you have a tent or whatever, you're making it work. And many local communities are deciding temporarily not to enforce code around these kinds of things when you can document it that you are indeed a wildfire survivor. So they already are trying to adapt at a local level, and it's happening regardless these rules pass or not.
Thank you for adding that, Commissioner Jacobson. All right. I too feel compelled to keep moving on this, and I'm curious, Deputy Director Green, if you want to shape up our next step as we entertain a motion so that then we can deliberate after that motion.
It's on mute there. Just finishing a little Word document here that I'll share on the screen. And John would really ask you to be attentive to this because I'm trying to capture issues that I know you and Steve have been flagging as well. If I can just spell existed right, I'll be right with you. Okay, correctly. It's a little bit wonky of a table, but the best I could do to kind of make sure we can sort the issues that we might take up when. If it's all right, I'll share this, and if it's coming through, I'll explain it. So at our special meeting today, it sounds like for sure we'd like to give direction to staff and then pass a motion that amends the thresholds of numbers of dwelling units destroyed, which we had, I believe, 30% in cities, 50% in unincorporated communities, and 75% in rural residential areas. And John, I need you to check that because I only have my handwritten notes and not looking at the rule on those. There was a point you flagged, John, that where you wanted to fix the dwelling that existed on or before July 5th, 2020. So I think there was you just had this sort of add that wanted to put in there. Substantively, Commission had just been talking about, according to public comment, about uses inside urban areas. So I posited that we consider that for permanent rules. That could certainly be, in November if Commission would prefer. And then we've also heard about the number of extensions granted. Right now, we're silent on that. John and I chatted about this briefly. I feel like we're really in such a learning mode here that we don't have a recommendation on the number of extensions at this time. And so that I think we'd recommend taking up in the permanent rule as well. To refer to also Director Rue may have some thoughts, and certainly John or Steve from a staff perspective. I may have missed.
No, I think you're headed in exactly the right direction.
So thank you, everyone. So I've been kind of tinkering here as we talked to it. I think it might be helpful for me if I could, if you don't mind me, you probably do mind me sharing my screen after listening to me all afternoon. But if I could share my screen and kind of run through sort of what I've cataloged here, and I promise you guys I'll do it quickly this time. Can you see that?
It's coming. It's not here yet, John.
Okay.
There it is.
Yes.
So I'm going to run up to the top. I'm going to go beep. And I don't have I don't think I've got every single thing, but I've got enough, I think, to give us a sense. So, so with regards to the extension, and I was prepared to say let's don't limit them. Then I heard maybe from a legal standpoint it'd be a more seamless transition if we did limit them here, but did not limit them in the permanent rule. Then I heard the director's office say, let's don't. So I'm open. If the commission was inclined to, there's these two little simple things we could do. Other than 30 months, we could say 36 months and 2 additional 12-month extension. That's 5 years. With regard to the issue of the. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get crosswise with the.
No, there's no objection there. I wasn't on the noon call or the break call with you and Steve. So I think I think if I speak for myself and for Jim, we think that's fine.
This is a minor adjustment. This was an issue that was raised by one of the county planners who said, well, what if there was a house that was approved to be built on July 5th and you got built and then you got anyway. So I don't think that's probably happened very often, but it's, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we could just add this little bit of language here that, it says that a temporary residential use in conjunction with a dwelling that either existed or had received land use approval to be constructed on July 5th, so on and so forth. Again, that's awfully minor. We probably go the other way. I did want to talk about this language here. Again, it's repeated in several locations, and that is, is it necessary to, to say or to specify by rule that although you can be in an adjacent county, that county has to be on the same side of the mountains. I think intuitively that does make sense, but again, at this point, we don't know how this is going to shake out. So I'm fine. I think staff would be fine to remove that, and then it would just say, or within the county or an adjacent county, with regards to the ability to site principally campgrounds. Ability language, I think we've got worked out. I think we do want to make a little adjustment. That's not true. So again, that's the same language again, obviously, with the extensions and on the same side of the mountains. And there was one little piece right here. I think I just missed this. It was brought to my attention by a planning director who has a really sharp eye. So we probably want to undelete that. Again, really simple fix, almost a grammatical fix. And we'll get down here to the Goal 14 language, which talks about the thresholds or the percentages. And so I would say, I think 15% is the number that folks seem to be gravitating towards the urban growth boundary. And then, I don't know, I plug in 30, maybe just say 15% for unincorporated communities too. Again, this is a temporary rule. And as I mentioned earlier, I do feel like if there's a time to give folks the benefit of the doubt, this is it. This is one of those times. I think there's there's some other little adjustments, but they're continuations of the series of items that we've talked about.
John, may I ask a question?
So absolutely.
Vice Chair Permine, so with your permission, John, did the suite of rule amendments address a hierarchy right now? I'm struck with that our thresholds are really getting at land supply. So this is a kind of a two-part question. The thresholds that now say is 15% across the board get at the fact that 15% of the land supply has been destroyed. What we don't, of the buildable land supply structures, what we don't get at is, what we know is the condition is there may not be the supply to replace that inside the urban growth boundary and then in the other areas. So that's why that's why we're here today. So I guess that leads me to just wonder, is there kind of do we still retain the hierarchy of placement of folks, rehousing of folks inside their community first, inside the urban area first, and then heading out into unincorporated areas?
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Director Green. And so I would say to that, I think it doesn't in a absolutely direct way or a direct stated way, but I think it does in the way that it's shaped. And by it, I mean the full concept. Frankly, again, we're starting with the assumption. I think it's a reasonable one. It's I think more than an educated guess that most people will in fact be inside urban growth boundaries. And there's the existing statute on transitional housing accommodations that hopefully will help facilitate that, along with the other things that are going on. Not that we shouldn't investigate that further, but I don't think that's off the mark. And then with the way that we've structured, giving the greatest development potential with areas that are closest to or in an existing built environment, unincorporated communities, Goal 14 exception areas, and then to a lesser extent, rural residential areas, and then further lesser extent, that regressive sort of approach, ending up with there being some tuning and some honing on what can happen on farm and forest lands, but not opening those lands up to activities that wouldn't otherwise be permissible or in accordance with those goals. So again, we haven't said this has to go here, this has to go there, that has to go there. But we are building a program that says, first and foremost, we accept that most of it's going to go over here in urban growth boundaries, and beyond that, the greatest potential for development is, in those areas that are largely planted zones or proximity that are planted zone for highest development potential. With our last resort, so to speak, being farm and forest lands. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but hopefully kind of like out the reasoning.
It does, John. And could you just move your page there to the 15, 15, 15 to your thresholds that you were on? It might provide the commission some comfort if there was an expression by the applicant that not only was 15% of their communities, their structures burned, but they don't have land inside their urban area to accommodate it. So it's sort of that two piece that it's just simply a statement and some proof, some check that yes, there is, not asking for a complete buildable lands inventory, but just again, assuming good intent, but a statement that they're pursuing this because there's not land within inside the urban growth area. And that allows, a conversation just, among, colleagues that are all set up in partnership to enforce the system, that there's that conversation that, okay, we did, commission and staff did its due diligence, that there really isn't, we know Josh and Commissioner Warren and other officials in Jackson County, for example, have been all over every inch of Phoenix and Talenton and know for a fact that there's not that land inside the urban growth area to do it. But there might be, that might provide some comfort while we're dropping the thresholds. It may also just be an issue for that permanent rule that we do for future. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you again, Vice Chair and Deputy Director Green. I agree as a planner. Of course, I agree with that approach. My anxiety, I have a little bit of anxiety only because then I think that is more of a discretionary type of an exercise. Now, maybe you can prove it through, you should be able to prove facts and evidence will prove, what the right answer is. But to the extent someone was inclined to oppose a proposal of this nature, I think it would be more likely for a county to prevail or even maybe avoid an appeal, if it was a hard, fast numerical demonstration as opposed to more of a judgmental call. Mm-hmm. Is my only thoughts. And so again, I'm perfectly happy to do with whatever the commission would like. My feeling at this time, and my advice would be to move forward with what we have today, mm-hmm. but absolutely want to consider that more as we transition into a more permanent setting. So again, that's my feeling. But I'm happy to do whatever is believed to be the right approach.
All from me, thank you.
All right, looks like Josh has something to add.
Not a whole lot, but I agree with what John said. I mean, it gets complicated fast when we try to build that analysis in right now. For instance, a lot of there may be land that's available on paper, but the people that own it don't want to volunteer it or do anything with it. And then that becomes really problematic quite quickly. So anyway, I just wanted to add that because that's part of what I was thinking when we were talking about this.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I feel like we've had great pre-deliberation discussion. So we're at this point where we will need a motion that we can then deliberate on before we vote.
If I may, Vice Chair Pearmine, Esther, would you mind bringing up the motion? Do you have a slide with the motion, the alternate motion there? I feel like I saw that earlier today, but I may have been dreaming. And if so, thank you. If so, okay, that is great. So optional. So I move the commission adopt as recommended by the department with the following changes. Note with, that. So inside UGBs, you could remove right now for the purpose, Esther, I think that if commission is amenable, we would remove that third bullet to permanent. And also the last two bullets would be moved to the next permanent rulemaking. But the thresholds would move to, I believe you almost have it right, but it's 15, 15, 15.
I'm sorry, Deputy Director. So the second bullet point.
I think if you just amend the threshold of dwelling units to 15% and just remove the 30%, it'll be clean. And then the final two bullets could be removed. The number of extensions in the inside UGB. Staff recommends that we consider that in permanent, but this is commission's motion. So we know for sure we have those two second and third bullets down. Back to you, Vice Chair, please. Thank you. Thanks, Esther.
I would offer real quickly, and I apologize for interrupting. I think staff's recommendation would be to retain a higher number for rural residential exception areas. Again, I certainly there's flexibility on that, but I get given the nature, as we look at the slide earlier, where they're pretty dispersed, they're pretty wide, and they're also distant from services. It would seem that a higher number would be more appropriate there, but that's, like I said, those are just my thoughts as staff. So thank you for that.
John, did you land on a number?
Well, I had 75%, Vice Chair, but again, I don't know whether that's I don't know we had much conversation about that. I know some of the folks that I talked to have agreed with the notion that threshold should be higher, and that didn't seem to strike them as a unlikely number, unworkable number.
That sounds good. I think that unless commissioners disagree, does any other commissioner? Go ahead, Commissioner Lilac.
Vice Chair, thank you. I really want to go back to Commissioner Jacobson to see if she thinks that that's a reasonable number, or if it should be something like 60%, something that I as one of the areas, I just want to make sure it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Lilac. I was just thinking about that as well. So, man, I mean, this is one of those kind of hard calls where I don't think that there is necessarily we know exactly what the right answer is, and if 2020 is any indication, we also don't know what might be coming next and where we have to apply this. But I think we're okay-ish with the changes.
To 60, Commissioner Jacobson, so it'd be 15, 15, 60. Is that right? Or 15, 15, 75.
Yeah. Oh, just changed.
Yeah, it was. So John had recommended 75. Commissioner Lilac posited 60.
Yeah, I think I would say 60 probably.
Thanks, Esther.
And then, Vice Chair, can I just offer one other suggestion?
Please.
I liked I really think John came up with a solid recommendation for the removal of 36 months with 2 extensions.
Mm-hmm, right.
So I know that was contemplated, put on, taken off. Just as one commissioner, I liked John's proposal a lot.
I agree.
I agree also.
John, can you just state the language that Esther could put on the screen? So that would be a 4th bullet, Esther. Thanks, you got it. Now look at you. She's so fast.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, that's it.
Did we also need the language around adjacent county and removing the Cascade Mountain mention?
Or would you, Vice Chair Piermine, or would that be something Commission would like in permanent rule? So we have it either today or permanent, but for sure it seems to remain. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
John, go ahead, Commissioner Lilac.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair. I'm the one that just initially suggested it to John. It's just a consideration, and I'm not strongly wedded to this. We haven't received in Deschutes County any of these requests. Now, I don't know if our neighbors in Jefferson or Klamath or any other counties that are adjacent to the counties most directly impacted. So not having heard from anyone, and I shared some of my suggestions with county planning directors, I haven't heard from anybody. Perhaps we keep it as is and we consider it during permanent rulemaking. Just my thoughts.
I'm inclined to remove it just because it seems like people could go either direction if they are and might be putting an unnecessary boundary if our intention is really, yeah. So I'm more inclined to leave it, but go ahead, Commissioner Jacobson.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think keeping the adjacent county part is really important. I think we could remove the located on the same side of the crest piece, but I think as long as we keep that adjacent county part, that's really important. And just for some context here, when FEMA starts looking at if you have a housing mission approved and where they possibly would set up, they look at 50 miles from the impacted area, and they don't necessarily look at county boundary lines. So it's very appropriate, like in Lincoln County, that Tillamook County could be a potential option for housing things there. So I think as long as we keep that adjacent county piece, the mountain part, I don't hang on to, but the adjacent county is important.
Great, I support that.
All right, so someone will need to make a motion based on this slide, but I want to be sure that all commissioners are having a chance to add anything you'd like to be considered. It might be hard to read this, so I think we'll get closer soon.
Vice Chair, it might be a little easier if I may. Esther, if you could just show that red as a strikeout. The red on located the same side of the crest of the Cascade, I think was where Commissioner Jacobson was headed, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. So just maybe show that as a strikeout. Possible on PowerPoint, not sure. Because we have other reds, so we don't want to imply that all the reds are removed because we have some good reds above in the extensions. Or literally just remove that text, Esther, if you'd like, just delete it.
Yeah, it looks like Josh also has something to so it sounds like the slide. Can you keep working on that slide? And then Josh, if you want to add a layer.
Sure, I just wanted to clarify, since I'm just listening here and it wasn't totally clear to me about the limiting extensions. That comes up multiple times throughout here. I believe the section that's edited here has to do with rural residential areas, if I'm not mistaken, but it also comes up in other areas. So if the commission wants to carry that over to the other areas, just be clear about that, when you make your motion.
Appreciate that clarification. And yes, I think that we all are seeing nods for that. All right, still in motion, the visual. Just going to ask Commissioner Sandoval, do you have any other aspects you want to make sure are included, or is this working, these changes working?
Yeah, no, they're working. I think what I was trying to kind of pay attention to was kind of the assurance that people wouldn't really take advantage of this, to make sure that we had those provisions against. And I think we do in terms of the threshold, in terms of the threshold, and then what's the other thing? Well, anyways, that was. Go ahead.
Commissioner, sorry, Kirsten here, but I think it was the enforcement, perhaps.
Yeah, and the 5 years as well. So I think those three things pretty much satisfy that.
Thank you. I'm just going to go around and ask Commissioner Holova. Anything else?
No, I think my part about enforcement, I think, was answered with reminding me that manufactured homes was not a part of it. So once that was explained in its fullness, I just wanted to have a discussion about it because it was brought up. So I think that answered it adequately. And all the percentages and all that, I'm looking to more people in this group than me on that. So I'm glad we're all engaged.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Warren?
Just want to bring up again that, and maybe this is more for the permanent rulemaking, but do we want to just limit this to wildfire just in case something else comes along the line since 2020 is so awesome?
Great question. Great question. I think John, you want to respond to that?
Well, thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Warren. I having kind of contemplated a little bit, I think we might be best off right now to leave it as written. And one of the reasons I say that is because I built so much of it on the executive orders that the governor has issued. Now, that's not to say we could go. It would be a bigger lift to go back in. And which isn't to say we shouldn't do it. I mean, but I think that the combination of a couple of things, and including that one of the beauties I've come to learn or come to understand about the temporary rules, you can amend them, you can extend them, but you can't amend them. Would lead me to think it might be just as well for the time being to leave it as written. But again, that's your call. Those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, John. I would agree with that. And then maybe just say we flag for permanent. Yeah. Commissioner Jacobson, any last thoughts, or is it, I see a beautiful slide in front of us now. Are things being captured okay?
Sorry, my mute button there was sticking and I couldn't get off. Nothing more from me.
Okay, great. Deputy Director,
so sorry. Esther was using my shorthand language for that existed on her before, and I think John had heard from a planning director that there was another that had been permitted. So John, could you just look at that third bullet with respect to your rules that you're tracking? Because I think that we need another word or two in there. That was approved. You had it on your screen a moment ago.
Yes, I'm sorry. It was, you get there. It was a little longer than that, and let's say it would read temporary residential uses in conjunction with dwelling that either existed or had received land use approval to be constructed on July 5th, 2020.
Could you just say that again slow, Esther? Yeah, thanks.
So starting with in conjunction with a dwelling, the next line I'm afraid I'm not seeing her screen, but the next words are either that either existed or had received land use approval prior to being constructed.
Existed or had received.
Excuse me. Had either had received. Either existed or had received land use approval to be constructed on July 5th, 2020.
I'm sorry, John. I need that one more time. I'm sorry.
Trust me, I understand that either existed.
Okay, so stop there, if you don't mind. In conjunction. Yeah, so John, I know you're not looking at Esther's screen, but so Esther has on the screen in conjunction with a dwelling. So I think this is where we start. Yeah.
Right. Yep. So start with there, and then the next language would be that either existed
Okay.
or had received land use approval
Okay.
to be constructed.
Okay.
That's the new language. And then
There
it
you
would
go.
go on to say on July 5th, 2020.
On or before July 5th.
I think on.
Okay. Okay, so in conjunction with a dwelling that either existed or had received land use approval to be constructed on July 5, 2020.
Correct. Yes, I believe that's exactly right.
And we've lost the actual anchor to that language. So John, do you want to give us like where it lives in the rule? Which section at all? Yeah.
I do. It's at 2 locations. It is in, that's Division 4, the first location. And it would be in be on page 8, lines 9 and 10 of the draft rule. And then also, I believe in Division 22, to be in subsection 12, page 29, lines 12 and 13.
Thank you. Thanks, Esther.
I think we've done it. I think we're ready for a motion.
I'll do it. This is a long one, so forgive me for my mistakes already. I move the commission adopt amendments to OAR Chapter 660, Divisions 4, 6, 11, 12, 14, 22, and 33 as recommended by the department with the following changes. Amends the threshold of dwelling units to 15% in a city's urban growth boundary, at least 15% in an unincorporated community boundary, or at least 60% in a rural residential exception area. And just a side note that we have city's urban grown boundary, it should be growth boundary. In conjunction with a dwelling that either existed or had received land use approval to be constructed on July 5th, 2020, Division 4, page 8, lines 9-10, draft rules, Division 22, subsection 12, page 29, lines 12 through 13. Uses approved under this section are to be removed or converted to an allowed use within 36 months from the date of the governor's emergency declaration. A county may grant 2 additional 12-month extensions upon a demonstration. A wildfire identified in an executive order issued by the governor in accordance with Emergency Conflagration Act, ORS 476-510 through 476.610 has destroyed homes or caused residential evacuations, or both within the county or an adjacent county.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Warren, for the long motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Esther, do you want to call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner, yes.
Commissioner Lilac, good point. Further discussion?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, just one quick question. So the 4th bullet, that will apply wherever that language is in the rules. So removing the crest of the mountain and the Cascades. I'm assuming that that's part of the motion. And then my other question was with the 3rd bullet point where it says, at the end, it says page 8, lines 1 through 33. I think that actually also occurs in a couple of different places in the rule. If I recall correctly, John, just to make sure that both of those are consistent, that those changes will then go across various parts of the rules. Is that right?
So thank you, Vice Chair, Commissioner. That's my understanding, and so I have to admit I didn't notice the site in the room, but I would say yes, to the extent that this language applies at multiple locations. We want to make sure that the motion applies to all those locations. I think we can probably voice that, but that was my understanding of the commission's intent.
Okay, thank you. I just saw the page 8 lines 133, so I just wanted to make sure we weren't limiting ourselves with that one. Thank you.
As far as process, do we need to say as amended? Because it was read differently, or?
I think actually, interestingly, Commissioner Warren did not read that part. Did not read that parenthetical, but if it's acceptable, Steve, if you could come on mic and just clarify for us if we could put instead in the parenthetical there.
Let's not get too hung up on it.
Several locations, yeah.
We're going to file these as temporary rules, and I think we've got it. So
cool.
Don't get too hung up on your motion here.
Excellent.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. So any further discussion before we take the roll? All right. Seeing none. Esther.
Commissioner Halova.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandoval.
Aye.
Commissioner Warren.
Aye.
Commissioner Lilac.
Aye.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Pearmine.
Aye.
And Chair MacArthur with an excused absence.
All right. So congratulations. Well done, everyone, in adopting temporary rules. Thank you to staff for incredible work and detail, and commissioners for discussion, and public for great comments and helping us in making this decision. So we are really grateful for everyone. We do have public comment now, and I believe we have one member of the public who has been interested in general public comment. And so we can turn to that. And I know it's been a long time since we've had a break, but we're close. And also the member of the public, Mr. Davis, also provided written testimony to us that came to us just recently. But I will open the Casaria for you to bring in Mr. Davis for public testimony.
Mr. Davis, you can unmute when you're ready.
And Mr. Davis, I start a timer, and then you get to hear the chimes. And then if we have additional questions, we can share them with you after that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you much. Can you all hear me?
We can, yes, welcome.
Thank you much. Good day, folks. My name is William Davis. I'm 35, board member of my neighborhood association, and a homeowner in the city of Salem. First and foremost, I really want to thank you all for your service, as I know how challenging this position is, as it's changing the course of our neighborhoods. As my boy would say, it's a humongous responsibility. This process is a big deal. In preparation, I made an in-depth analysis using fairly accessible language, with pictures even, trying my best to capture the prospect of how the proposed changes will alter my life. It's not necessary if, it's a will. My neighborhood and the consequences of our collective future. My neighborhood recently encountered a rezoning proposition, which was withdrawn after substantial public opposition. Thankfully, my neighbors managed to organize canvassing during COVID-19, rally broad support on Nextdoor, and the unanimous support of the neighborhood association, while even creating a website that's available in my written testimony. However, the developer has promised to build even greater density than the RM2 zoning without our consent, using middle housing. At present, his proposition is very possible with the current middle housing model code. Many of the predictable concerns I cover with nuance in the written testimony using my neighborhood of tiny homes and tiny streets. It's 1960s construction where I live, next to a cemetery with deer regularly in our yards. To demonstrate these, I rented a U-Haul that's similar to the size of my house and drove it around with a dystometer for pictures. So there's lots of good fun pictures in there to see kind of exactly what we're looking at. To list a few, I go into greater detail. I object to the required minimum height of 35 feet. I know previously in one of the earlier iterations, 35 feet was not the maximum height that was going to be required everywhere. I object to the required parking maximum of 1 space per unit with on-street credits. Our streets are tiny. One of our collector streets, the city calls, is actually, it's right on the corner of where they want to put the apartment complex. It's 13 feet wide, the city measures it at. That's total improvement, so it's just 13 feet wide of a barely paved dirt path. I object to the 10-foot maximum setbacks, just because of the height for the most part. 10 foot would probably be fine with 2-story buildings. I object to the fact that the 1,500 square foot lot of a townhome could actually allow for even denser zoning than an RM2 apartment complex. If I put the 1.5 acres into a calculator, it comes out at even more units than an RM2 apartment complex would allow. Acreage purchases.
Mr. Davis, just so you know, you hit your 3 minutes there. And so maybe we will be discussing this in more detail next commission meeting as well. So if you want to pull through the top line threads you want us to be considering, and really appreciate your time.
Okay. Yeah, I just had a couple more things. But yeah, basically it makes single family residents very nervous of acreage purchases within single family zoning with the ability to make a townhome at only 1,500 square feet. Yeah, our streets are narrow paths. Many of our houses are often a dozen feet tall. We have few bike lanes or sidewalks, and even on arterial streets, they often are obstructed with ADA requirements by mailboxes and garbage cans, as our infrastructure is already a patchwork of insufficiency, requiring that we allow piling more people into humongous towers over our little homes isn't really good planning for us.
Thank you very much. Again, the detail in the letter, I'm looking at it too, so really appreciate that detail and your time. Commissioners, any questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you again for coming and sharing with us today. And we will be discussing this in more detail at our next meeting. So thank you very much. All right, I think commissioners and public, we have completed our agenda and again, adopted temporary rules for our community. So I believe we can adjourn the meeting. And I just, again, want to express gratitude to everybody who's here and your time and energy. And I'm so grateful to be serving with you all.
And you did a wonderful job today, Vice Chair.
Why, thank you, Ms. Director Rue.
We agree.
All right. We'll see you all in less than a month almost. All right.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.